Hey, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Council Chambers on this beautiful August 28th. And this is our first meeting back from the summer session, so hopefully everyone had a chance to relax a little bit, recharge the batteries, and then get ready for the coming year ahead of us as we deal with kind of the growth pressures and the service levels that we want to see in our communities. Members of Council, there's the agenda before you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Town Council adopt the August 28, 2023 regular council meeting as presented.
Thank you. Administration, anything to add?
Nothing to add at this time, Your Worship.
Thank you. We'll call the question all in favor. Okay, and that's carried. Okay, moving on with our agenda number 3, which is the public input session. This is the time that we allow residents to address council on anything that's not on the current agenda. Administration, has anybody registered?
Through Your Worship, no, there has not been.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody in the gallery like to speak to council on anything that's not on the agenda tonight? See none. Number 4 is for presentations and delegations. Nothing is scheduled for tonight. We do not have a statutory public hearing, so moving on to number 6, which is the adoption of council minutes from July 10th. I know that was a little while ago, so our memories may be a little bit of foggy. So hopefully you had a chance to read them all, to make sure that there was no errors or omissions, and it was correct. Councillor Meyer for the motion, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council approved the July 10th, 2023 regular council meeting minutes as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Meyer. Members of Council, as mentioned, it was July 10th. Any errors or omissions on those minutes? Okay. I didn't see any either, so I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay. Moving on to number 7 of our agenda, which is council committee minutes for our boards and commissions. 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move that Town Council receive the board and committee meeting minutes for information.
Okay, thank you. So members of the council, all 3 minutes are on the table to ask questions about. So that's the Stony Plain Public Library from May 17th, Subdivision Appeal from May 4th, and the Meridian Housing Foundation from June 22nd. Members of council, any questions, comments? Councillor Hansford, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have one quick question. On Meridian Foundation on page 26 of 122, and I have to get there myself to remember. I was wondering if the statement right at the top, 6.4, Meridian, which municipality provided accurate information on the allocation of the tax levy?
Okay. Yeah, so in the tax levy, there's all 3 municipalities are part of the Meridian Housing Foundation, and we had our own little kind of synopsis or breaking it down to understandable language, and they were all correct, but Parkland County was easier to read and better to understand. So that's what we're going to copy from going forward, is that we're going to have, since the 3 of us are part of the Meridian Housing Foundation, we're going to have a unified statement for all 3 municipalities.
That will make it easier.
Yes.
For all 3, the residents in all 3, to understand and not believe that they're paying something different.
That's correct.
All right, thank you. Well, you notice I phrased that in a positive. I didn't say who are the ones that didn't. I asked who. Just pointing out I can be positive.
I've known you for a long time, Councilor Hansford, and you've been positive since day 1 of 2007.
Thank you. Well, that's when you came on board.
That's when I came on
I
board.
was positive before that.
Well, I can't attest to that, Councilor Hansford. I can attest to going forward from this date.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from members of council? Okay. See none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. Okay, moving on to bylaws. And we have one bylaw that's up for first reading today, and it's the traffic bylaw. I appreciate the background on that, as As we all know, as members of council, we receive a lot of calls, concerns, suggestions about enforcement, safety, and how we can make things better. And our staff have taken all those and come back with a review, which happens on a regular basis. So I'm looking forward to see some of the suggestions, and then also hearing from members of council of what could be tweaked to make it a little bit better before we go to the public hearing. Go ahead, administration.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council, administration. In your agenda package is the amendments or the recommended amendments to the traffic bylaw. In addition to that, we have prepared a slideshow for you just to give a little bit more information. The traffic bylaw is responsible for regulating pedestrian and vehicle traffic within the town of Stony Plain. The previous bylaw was passed in council in June 2016. This bylaw before you has been reviewed by administration, and the recommended amendments are contained in the proposed traffic bylaw, which is 2677 G23. The desired outcomes of the review included for it to be clear and easy to navigate, fair, reasonable, and enforceable. Our intention was to limit confusion and interpretation, to remove duplicate legislation that was captured in provincial legislation that we are authorized to enforce, and to regionalize alignment and consistency. During the administration review, traffic bylaws from across the Edmonton Metro region were conducted. Legislative Services Department also conducted a review. The review of current legislation related to the traffic bylaw included the Traffic Safety Act, the Municipal Government Act, the Land Use Bylaw, Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act, and the Use of the Highway and Rules of the Road Regulation. The recommended amendments included some formatting to make it agreeable to the current town formatting. To move sections for clarity to ease of finding the information within the document. Removal of sections that are already covered in existing legislation for which Stony Plain officers are already empowered. Reflection of enforcement actions consistent with peer communities, including adjustments of the fine amounts, to align Stony Plain in the middle range of the spectrum for each of the charges. Updated language to include current terminologies. Do you have any questions today?
Thank you. There was a lot to the agenda package. So members of council, any questions regarding the bylaw? Councillor Hansard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to refer you to page 60 of 122, item number 3.23.4, and it has to do with the school bus. I was a little confused by the wording in that short paragraph. It reads, "No person shall park a school bus on a highway in a residential area unless the school bus is lawfully engaged in the delivery of persons or items in its normal course of business." So one, I guess we do have some areas where highways pass through on streets. A highway, 779, for instance, south of here, where it appears that it's in a residential area, but all of the lands, I believe, along the highway have been redesignated so that they could be commercially developed. What I'm curious about is, one, why would someone park a school bus on a highway? And two, do we mean street rather than highway? And if we really do mean residential, does that mean in neighborhoods like Forest Green or Willow Park or Meridian Heights that people may not park their school buses along the road, on the shoulder of the road? Because we did have that issue a number of years ago, and people complained about that. So could we just get some clarification over that wording and the choice of those words?
That's a good comment, Councillor Hansard.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Hansard. Highway under the Traffic Safety Act legislation refers to a roadway. So it's anything that the public has implied consent to. So that can be a highway, a roadway. This section existed in the original traffic bylaw, and it was to limit the issues of people parking the school buses in the residential areas, limiting the parking for the residents that resided there. This section wasn't changed from that previous bylaw.
Okay. If I may, Mr. Mayor, just for clarification, a number of years ago, there was an issue with the school bus drivers following their morning routes would park along 50th Avenue and go to breakfast at one of the downtown restaurants. Very well-known, very popular place. And they would have their breakfast and visit. And there was a whole controversy that was stirred up when that began to be clamped down upon. And the school bus drivers did not like it. I would say in my early years on council, that was the number one thing that I received phone calls, emails, and text messages about. And I know council of that day grappled with, where are the school bus drivers allowed to park? If I'm not mistaken, it resulted in those school bus drivers taking their business from our downtown core and going elsewhere where they were welcomed to park their school buses without being, in their words, harassed. So I'm just trying to understand that, because we do have people who take their buses home, especially at the end of their noon run if they're running kindergartens, children, or at the end of their morning run if they're just doing 2 routes a day. And I would hate to see us terminate business for our businesses if the bus drivers are wanting to go almost every day to have breakfast and coffee following their routes. I don't even know if they are doing that now, but it doesn't seem to leave any leeway. So maybe help me understand, as well as any of those who may be watching, and I know one does faithfully tune in who was a school bus driver. So I'll probably be getting a phone call about this.
Your worship, through you to Councillor Hansard, they would not be able to park downtown on 50th Street as it is right now because the length of the bus exceeds the space for the angle parking. So they wouldn't be able to at this time anyways.
Along 50th Avenue.
50th Avenue.
Where they could park parallel.
I understand. The challenge would be trying to balance the residential parking complaints that we receive as well as the ability for them to be able to take it downtown and be able to park downtown. That is a challenge when we're writing legislation to appease both areas.
Your worship, through to Councillor Hansard, when we wrote the bylaw in 2016, it was an issue at that point, and council elected to include what is currently in the bylaw related to buses and parking on residential streets, because we were receiving a lot of complaints about bus drivers would do their route, go and park at home or in places that likely weren't the best for accommodating bus parking, and staying there till 3 o'clock, then going back, doing their route, and then going back out to wherever their buses were stored for the evening. So there were some complaints that council received at the time, and this was a response to those complaints that were received. However, this is part of what we're doing this evening in terms of it's 2023, and maybe council has a different perspective or has heard different things in the public, and maybe there's a different solution that we can come up with that is not the one that's currently in the bylaw. So it's not a legislated requirement for us to do this related to buses. We do have length, as Ms. Anderson has stated, related to parking spaces. We also do have public parking that might accommodate buses in different areas of the community that potentially could allow them to walk downtown and enjoy breakfast or lunch or whatever they choose to do at some places. Friesen Brothers is a private parking lot. I have seen buses parked there on occasion, also enjoying the kitchen that's at Friesen Brothers. So Again, this is not, I think this is a response to an issue at the time, and it could be removed, altered, changed, or left the same in the current form, in the, what would be the new bylaw, updated bylaw.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Hansard. Move on to Councilor Loyens.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to administration, in regards to the commercial and heavy vehicles, we have a lot of residents that have service trucks, welding trucks, things that do exceed or come very close to this 6,000 kilograms. Is this going to be completely complaint-driven, that somebody would have to be aware of somebody parking on the road, understanding that the traffic bylaw strictly states roads and not personal property?
Your Worship, through you, through Councillor Lyons, the traffic bylaw regulates highways, so within the town of Stony Plain. The land use bylaw or the community standards bylaw would be the legislation that would speak to private property.
But would this be strictly complaint-based? So if somebody sees one of these heavy vehicles parked on the road, that they would have to call bylaw and bylaw would come out and give a warning? Or is it going to be monitored as they drive through town? Or how is this going to be put into effect?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Lyons, currently the Stony Plain enforcement team does respond proactively and reactively to complaints. So if they are seeing a commercial vehicle that is exceeding the rules on the roadway without a complaint being generated, they may address it.
Okay, next.
And then one more, Your Worship, if you may. And it talks about being over 12 meters. Is that including, say, a truck and a utility trailer? Or is it the utility trailer just being the thing that they worry about weights? (3.23-3). Exceed 12 meters in length upon highway within the town, except for commercial vehicles exceeding 12 meters in length are permitted to park.
Just give me one moment, I'm just getting to the top of the commercial vehicle section.
Okay, do we have an answer?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Lyons, would I be able to come back to you with an answer for that? I just want to verify the wording of the bylaw.
Of course, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Pletchko?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, to administration. As I read through the package, I was looking for something very specific. And because I was looking very specific, I don't know if I've missed it or if it's just not in here. So I'm going to refer to page 32 and page 40. We talk about motorcycles and we talk about bikes. Where does electric bikes fit into this category?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Pletchko, at this point in time during our review, we did not include electric bikes into the traffic bylaw. Currently in our industry, there is a group that has been approaching the provincial government to include electric motorized bikes into current provincial legislation. So we have defaulted to wait until the results of that have come forward.
So just to elaborate on that a little bit, is there no way to include it in both categories for a period of time until we can decide where it goes? There is a number of them move within our community. They go from 0 to about 40 mile an hour, and I have had a number of calls from residents regarding them on our trails. And then on our secondary highways, I've seen them a number of times driving down the middle of the road, stopped and had conversations with the individuals and go, yeah, it's a motorcycle, we can drive wherever we want. So I'm just a little concerned that this is, while we sit and wait, we could have a safety problem within our community. And I think being proactive is much better than being reactive. So maybe there's something that we could look at including it, because both actually kind of covered a tiny bit, but really don't speak to the definition of an e-bike, right? Thank you.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Pletchko, At one section of the new traffic bylaw, there was a portion that captured responsible use of the bikes on the trail system. So if there are incidences where people are driving past our residents trying to use the trail system at unreasonable speeds, I would really encourage them to give us a call, because we do have the ability within the current bylaw, the way it is worded, to address those types of concerns as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Pletchko, actually, for the question there about electronic bikes. This came up actually over the last couple weeks for me as well, and I had a number of residents raise concern that provincially, as you've alluded to, it's not permissible on the municipal roadways, sidewalks, trails, that sort of thing. And so ended up in a conversation actually with a number of people from Spruce Grove, Stony Plain, about what would maybe define an e-bike. Is it a moped? Is it a motorbike? Is it, a pedal bike that is power assisted and that sort of thing? And so I've actually done some reading over the last week and came across a document put out by Alberta Transportation that actually really nicely defines all of those categories. And an e-bike, I think, is defined as being 500 watts or less in the latest definition, which a quick Google search is about half a horsepower. Other municipalities that have added powered bikes have, used that definition. They've limited the speed, those sorts of things, and followed through with similar guidelines to, just traditional human sort of powered bikes and that sort of thing. But, it is something that, when it comes to, I guess, debate around the bylaw today, mobility aids and powered bikes is certainly something that I would love to see added in here. I certainly can appreciate that there's some work happening at a provincial level. But things don't always move at the pace that we hope. And so, I had a number of questions there, but I think they've been asked and answered. I do want to jump to page 41, if we could, please. And just looking for some clarification on 3.2, 2.0 as the category of metal spikes. And it's just, unless written authorization has been obtained, no vehicle with metal spikes, et cetera, may be operated or propelled on any paved hard surface highway or land. Now, just for clarification, would this include studded winter tires?
Your worship, through you to Councillor Anderson, this section of the bylaw does speak to metal spikes, lugs, cleats, or bands projecting from the surface of the wheel. I would have to do a little further research into the wording of this, and that's something that we could address if council would like to see that added.
Just looking at the Alberta Transportation sort of rules, I guess, and regulations around metal spikes, it looks like as long as they don't damage the road, I think is the criteria that they use. And so I was just looking for something similar within ours. The reason that came up, I had my car in for an oil change, and there were a number of individuals at the shop that I was at having a conversation about how they found studded tires were tremendously effective. They are residents within our community. They, in their storytelling, referenced a number of intersections that I have witnessed accidents at and those sorts of things, and how they felt that, there certainly was a safety element in terms of increased safety with the use of studded tires. And so, I would be curious to hear how, the studded tires impact our roads. It certainly wouldn't want something that would degrade our roads at a significant rate or something like that. But if there is an opportunity to use studded tires that's not going to degrade the roads but increase safety, I do think it's something that we should be considering. So not really a question there, but maybe I'll ask administration then directly. Is there any sort of concern around having studded tires in the municipality and how it affects our roadways in the winter months?
Through your worship to Councillor Anderson, I will I'll take some opportunity to try and give some high-level answers to that. Generally speaking, with the performance of studded tires over time with pavement condition, the number of vehicles that use studded tires isn't something easily tracked over time and directly correlated to the communities that they're in. It's generally expected that over time, prolonged community use of more people are using studded tires, there will be an increased pavement degradation. There isn't anything, I'll use a general term, like there's no smoking gun to that per se in communities in Alberta. That said, things like chains, cleats, or any additional, call it more heavier traction improvements that can be done to vehicles, highway authorities have reported that those do increase maintenance costs over time. But that's why they're generally found in more areas where you would require them. Say if you're driving through the mountains and you'll see the truck stops the pull over areas where they can pull over and put the chains on, because it's accepted that the maintenance of the snow clearing may not be able to get there in time where the trucks are going. So it's a trade-off. In more urban settings, again, most communities will try and discourage that practice because generally the snow clearing is more consistent, especially on major routes. So the trucks don't normally need to employ those measures. But directly with the effects of studded tires, I don't believe that there's anything direct causal that would say they do or don't. That the general practice is they will over time if everyone's using them. I'm not going to speak specifically to the comments in this bylaw. I'll let our supervisor maybe look into that for enforcement reasons, but that's maybe from the maintenance perspective what the studded tires may have.
Thank you for that. At first reading, obviously, we're looking at today, if that passes and we're looking at second reading down the road, I think that's something that I would be interested to hear from administration a little bit more about in terms of, I certainly can appreciate the difference between external chains and how that can chew up the road and that sort of thing. For Alberta Transportation to have the caveat that, you're permitted to have studded tires as long as they're not ripping up the roadway, to me would lend to the idea that there are studded tires that can be used that aren't going to degrade the road, at a serious rate or anything like that. The second piece, just, through the dialogue, you had mentioned that, it's kind of hard to judge how many people actually have studded tires. And so, the question there would be, are we putting something into bylaw that we're going to be able to actually enforce? Chains, yes, but studs, maybe not. And so I think maybe a discussion for us to have as council about possibly permitting studded tires within the municipality, similar to Alberta Transportation. So.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson, for that. And then before I go to the next speaker, I think that actually brings a good question, because I'm just thinking as I'm hearing the conversation is very similar to that we have trailers that are allowed for a certain time period. Can something be added this where there is no use of metal spikes, plugs, everything from a certain period, but they're allowed from November till April? Right? And that way if we have to enforce it, it's easier, and then I think it addresses the safety issues that we're kind of chatting about right here. So, those people that are using it and it's being kind of promoted as a safety enhancement to your vehicles. So if we don't allow them, then we have to make sure that all the providers around the area understand that. And if we do allow them, are they allowed 12 months a year, or is it only for part of the time? And I think it was a good conversation to have amongst council. Councillor Meyer, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have 3 questions, and they're kind of all unrelated. So I'll just start with the first one, through you to administration. I'm aware of several communities in the EMR that are considering 40-kilometer-an-hour blanket speed limits for residential streets. I'm just curious, during our review, if this was considered.
Through your worship, to Councillor Meyer. The way the current legislation is written in our bylaw does not limit the ability for us to implement that. We would be able to put up 40-kilometer-an-hour signs within the residential areas, and then that would be able to be implemented within our region with the way the bylaw is currently worded.
Okay. And so just a follow-up question to that. So in this bylaw, that would be not addressed, speed limits?
Your worship, through you to Councillor Myler, we did not include it in. The only restriction for speed within this current bylaw is within alleyways, and then as posted for speed limits, which is provincial legislation. It is something we'd be able to add for a second or third reading if council would like to see that included.
Okay, well then I'd just like to speak on that to my fellow councillors. It is an issue that obviously 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limits? Yes, sorry.
Okay. Again, this is the same thing that we've had issues with before, even though we have a new mic system. Please look strictly into the mic and talk directly into the mic and at a volume that we can hear, because even with the speakers on the mic on the stands, I think there's some issues of actually being able to hear the conversation.
Okay, so just to my fellow councillors, this is an issue that I spoke a lot of with residences during the campaign. It was fairly well received when I was speaking about it, and obviously there are a number of communities in the metropolitan region that are already considering this, and maybe administration could help me out. I believe there are communities that have already instituted this, I would like to see that written into this bylaw, and maybe we can discuss that a little bit more in further readings. But I do have other questions, if I could. Yes, sorry, Councillor.
Just hold on a second. Let me chair the meeting, please. Okay. So you made a comment. So we're just asking questions for clarity and understanding. So you've raised that comment, and if you want to make that change, we can do that when we actually accept the first reading, and then we can debate that, or we can just ask administration to bring back more information that we can consider that during the public input session, and also second and third reading, then we can add that or not add that at another point in time. So again, this is just asking questions for clarity and understanding. We need to understand what's being changed. You can make a couple comments here and there, and then when we actually move into debate, then you can ask for more questions, or if you want to make that amendment at that point in time, you can.
Okay.
Okay, you had a couple more.
Yeah. So just going back to my fellow councillors' discussions about e-bikes, along the same vein, I've noticed sort of an evolving issue with mobility scooters, which I'll note I couldn't find a definition for a mobility scooter in this bylaw, but I would just like to point out that some of these scooters are becoming, mobility scooters are becoming a bit more and more of a, in fact, I saw one the other day that I would call a small car, fully enclosed, signal lights, and whatnot, and it strikes me as this isn't addressed at all in this bylaw, either through definition or any specific, anything specific. So just on that regard, maybe that's another thing that we've missed. And then I do have one other question. That was really, I guess, a question.
That was that's a good comment. So in terms of, so Councillor Myers asking about, in terms of how do we address mobility scooters, and especially the increasing size and speed. Looking under the bylaw when I was reviewing it on page 34 of 122, there's a definition for a small car, which is a wheelbase of no larger or less than 270 centimeters. So in terms of mobility scooters and assistants, how do we classify that?
Your worship, through you to Councillor Meyer, a mobility scooter would be similar to a pedestrian. So the mobility scooter is how they are able to walk or move throughout town. So we would treat it the same as a pedestrian.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Meyer?
Yes, and just through you to administration, if maybe administration could speak to the 3.20 regarding helmet bylaw. I'm curious, having gotten many quarterly reports, I've never seen a helmet bylaw infraction specifically noted. I'm curious if administration could speak to our experiences enforcing that and if it's ever arisen.
Okay. Thank you. So that is, you said 3.20?
Your worship, through you to Councillor Meyer, we do have that legislated as well in provincial legislation. Currently, the way the municipal enforcement team will address it is through proactive measures, through things such as positive tickets or the ability to have a conversation with a youth. When you're interacting with children in a uniform capacity, we try to make our first interaction a positive interaction. So if we can encourage a youth to wear a helmet by showing up at the skate park and giving them a positive ticket because they're wearing a helmet, that is one way to positively impact that behavior. So you wouldn't see it in council reports because we're not issuing fines for it. We do have the ability to, but like I said, there's other options for us to encourage helmet use in a positive manner within our community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and I want to just say thank you. I think that's a great way to be handling that that concern. Just for clarity, there is provincial legislation surrounding that we're just following that.
Yeah, I believe it's a cut and paste.
Through your worship to you, Councillor Meyer, I would have to go back and double check the section of the legislation, but off the top of my head, I believe it's in the use of the highway and rules of the road regulation, but I can get back to you with a more definitive answer after.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Staying on that same kind of lines and the same section, I think this section is a very popular one tonight, obviously. It speaks specifically to scooters as non-motorized scooters. And we talked a little bit about mobility scooters, and we talked a little bit about e-bikes, but we also have the electric scooters, and they're becoming very, very popular. Same thing, we're seeing them significantly on our trail systems, on our sidewalks, and even some on our roadways. You mentioned the ability to address the e-bikes using the verbiage in 3.2, or 3.20, but with 3.20 specifically stating non-motorized scooters, how would we address any unfavorable behavior on motorized scooters?
Your worship, through you to Councillor Laurie, the definition of motorized versus non-motorized is something that I would have to do further research on. At this point in time, the way that section is intended is like battery powered or electric powered. Motorized would be combustible engine.
Okay, thank you for that, and maybe that's a good way to clarify that in this bylaw in future readings. Maybe we could include that you know, with non-combustible engines or anything like that. Would be a good one. And then I actually had a further question in respect to the helmet portion as it gets down into 3.20.4. Is the reason why the helmet portion only specifies bicycles because of the legislation, the provincial legislation? Because again, looking at all the various modes of transportation that are listed on here, whether it's a skateboard, roller skates, inline skates, and now the battery-operated scooters, the e-bikes, etc., would it not make sense that that helmet would be a requirement on any of those devices, any of those transportation modes, rather than just bicycles alone?
Your worship, through you to Councillor Laurie, currently the way the provincial legislation reads is cyclists.
Okay, thank you. So then at this point in time, in our bylaw, we would have no desire to change that because we're just following provincial legislation. And then as a follow-up to that, the positive tickets and that interaction I think are fantastic, but have we ever ran communication campaigns around helmet usage?
Your worship, through you to Councillor Laurie, at one point in time during my tenure here at the town of Stony Plain, we used to do an annual bike rodeo in which our officers worked with neighboring partners to put on an event for the community We also do have the ability to go into schools as requested and borrow a helmet kit from Alberta Health Services that can be used to help teach youth as well. So in regards to a specific targeted communication campaign, my answer would have to be no, but we do have tools in our toolbox that we would be able to address this as well.
Excellent, thank you. And then one more, if I may, Your Worship. In the parking section, and unfortunately, I didn't note it down as I was going through my notes, it speaks to parking, and I believe it's 500 millimeters from the road from the sidewalk for the wheels of a vehicle. And the way that it's written, it didn't seem super defined. So we have several issues that have been contacted in my tenure here about people who nose in, or people who park in a cul-de-sac or on a corner with both front wheels of their vehicles facing the sidewalk rather than the side wheels of their vehicle adjacent to the sidewalk. Is that something that is allowable under our traffic bylaw for a vehicle to park with both front wheels within 500 millimeters of the sidewalk? Or does it have to be the side wheels? And the reason why I ask this is there's many, many areas of town where, particular in corners or cul-de-sacs, turning radiuses are impacted, two-way traffic flow is impacted by people parking nosed in rather than parallel to the curb. So is nose in allowed in our bylaw? Is it addressed? Is it strong enough in the bylaw to be enforceable?
Go ahead.
Through your worship to you, Councillor Laurie, just wanted to clarify, are you speaking in regards to just in cul-de-sac parking?
I think we're looking at page 37 of 122, and it's about parallel parking, angle parking, and how far you need to be away from the curb.
Your worship, through to Councillor Laurie. So the 500 millimeters is specific to parallel parking. And 3.5.1 also states that unless angle parking is allowed or required, then people will parallel park. So there could be an assumption, or we could make a judgment that in some cul-de-sacs, we do permit front-end parking. If we have signs up that say you cannot nose in or park in that manner, then we would expect parallel parking to be occurring in that particular area. So from my perspective, we would have to properly sign a cul-de-sac to say no angle parking, as it's defined in this particular bylaw. As it currently states right now, there are some combination of angle parking and parallel parking happening across our community in different neighborhoods based on the parking, the lands or the sidewalk or the frontage that permits the best parking for the residential area that we've constructed in that particular location.
Excellent, thank you. So as a follow-up on that, when we have developers coming in and we're receiving area structure plans, we're receiving subdivision plans, all of those things, part of the consideration in that is access for emergency vehicles. And so whether it's a right angle turn in a road, whether it's a cul-de-sac, essentially anywhere that has a radius, we have specific requirements that they must meet in our land use bylaws for what the turning radius achievable within that must be. Once we start putting vehicles parking on those same roadways, that significantly changes the turning radius available for any vehicle in that area. So really, if we're approving something based on a turning radius, based on saying that the parking is only allowed to be parallel, but then we are allowing angle parking, are we not then contravening our own requirements by allowing the vehicles to park at an angle, therefore reducing the turning radius for our emergency vehicles?
Your worship, through the Councillor Laurie, just some general comments on the development concerns brought forward in that question. And I'll maybe leave the enforcement discussions for our CAPS team. When we're considering new developments, a couple of things have evolved since we've in what we're seeing in newer developments. For one, traditional cul-de-sacs, as we're being referred to, are not coming in as frequently. We're more in favor of larger turn bays. And the reasons for that are exactly what you listed. It improves the parking quality and use of space within those areas and consistency for vehicles to pass through. So there is a trend to get away from cul-de-sacs and newer developments. And also, generally speaking, what you brought up with the how the parking is used within those areas, there are, for most, and I'm speaking broadly, but for most areas, it's expected to be parallel in most new developments, unless otherwise stipulated with when we're discussing with the reviews. There's lots of nuances to parking when we're considering how the area is going to be used. Are there back alleys? Are for additional parking? Is there how the on-site parking will function? The street parking for that's often looked at. How the areas will grow. The typical trends that we're seeing with vehicles per household as well. So those are things that we contemplate at the development level. Generally, though, like this is, I think, something to consider with these bylaw discussions is we can't plan a bylaw to fully encompass people's behavior as the area matures, giving our enforcement arms the opportunity to add some discretion and alignment with how the area is supposed to go is part of this dialogue. That's something I'll maybe leave to our CAPS team to further elaborate on.
Okay. Any other comments from council? No. Okay. And thank you for pointing that one out. And I think leaving it open, allowing our residents to figure out how the parking is, and if there's an issue, definitely our staff will do the review as they have done in the past, and they make necessary adjustments. Very similar to no parking areas, restricted parking areas that our staff have already done in the past. Okay, that ends round one. Go back to round two. I know there's going to be lots of comments on this because this is something that we have not looked at since 2016, and there's definitely a lot of suggestions and comments that our staff have dealt with over the last few years to actually bring this forward. So, second round. Questions, comments? Councilor Laurie, go ahead. Councilor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just a question in regards, I'm assuming that because this is a provincial one, the ability to park within so many meters of a fire hydrant, of an intersection, so on, I think I can't remember whether it's 3 or 5 meters is the required law. Particularly in some of our smaller, tighter subdivisions, I've noticed that that's not necessarily being adhered to very well. Is that something that we proactively enforce, or is that, again, another one that is more reactive?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Laurie, during our patrols through residential areas, an officer will be proactively looking for parking complaints as well as reactively responding to complaints.
Excellent, thank you. And then as a follow-up to that, for things like fire hydrants, especially because sometimes they're not so easily seen, have we considered implementing any type of a program where we would mark the curb, for example? Like you could paint the curb for those 3 meters on either side of the fire hydrant in red so that people understand that there's a piece of equipment there that they cannot park in front of?
Pardon me. Through Your Worship to Councillor Laurie, painting the curb is not something that we do actively, and I don't know many communities that do it in the area. We do with certain infrastructure in the snow and the winter months, for example, hydrants, for example. We certain locations will be flagged with special flags to make sure that they're known if they get buried under a good snowfall. We can still locate them and operate them. But painting curbs, other identification measures are. I would say they're not. They would not ever not be considered, but they're not generally practiced unless there's a nuance or a specific need to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Pletko.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll refer to page 60, 3.21.0 off-highway vehicles. It says no person shall operate an off-highway vehicle within the limits of the town. I think that it contravenes a number of the ATVs that are ridden within our community in the rural properties that are out there. How do we address the farming and the acreage use that people are using these on?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Pletchko. So this off-highway vehicle is related to public roadways. So if you owned an acreage, as an example, and you're bombing around on a side-by-side with your kids, we would have no jurisdiction because it's your private property. Same would hold true for a farm. That's a private property. We have a lot of lands that are larger in nature in our community that some of these pieces of equipment could be used on. If they're on public property, then our enforcement services or RCMP, if they have the ability to stop them, would stop them and issue a violation under the Traffic Safety Act or this particular bylaw. The challenge being they are quite fast, quite quick and nimble, and it's not often that we're able to catch them. However, in my time here, we have had accurate descriptions and locations where the bikes or ATVs have gone to park for the evening, and the officers have gone and knocked on the door and either provided a violation or provided a warning related to the activities and actions. Skidoos are same thing. It's not something that should be on our roadways. And certainly, if we've got enough evidence or ability to go directly to the residential property of which is violating this particular section of the bylaw, we will certainly go and do that enforcement.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that answer.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from members of council? Councilor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to continue the dialogue with the e-bikes and mobility scooters, I know e-scooters were added to the discussion by Councillor Laurie. I know our neighbors to the east are undertaking a pilot project related to the electric scooters, and so that's one that I think from my perspective, I'm okay not to address at the moment, but e-bikes specifically and mobility aids, I'm going to offer just some thoughts for consideration, I think, as we go through first reading and come back for second. The first being, I think it would be helpful to add some of these definitions at the beginning of the bylaw. We have definitions for, bicycle and scooter and all of these other things, but being able to add that in there. The second thing is I would like to see, the option, I guess, if you will, for us to add e-bikes into that list along with bikes, non-powered scooters, that sort of thing. Potentially using the definition that has been put out there by Alberta Transportation and their small vehicle guidelines of under, I believe, 500 watts is the newest. I think it used to be 750. And I think as we've discussed as a council over the last year about the importance of recreation, opportunity for, residents to be out on the trails and, living that healthy, active lifestyle. We're looking at a couple of pathways between ourselves and Spruce Grove, and we have a number of residents who do rely on those powered bikes to get around and would be able to fully participate in the recreation amenities that our community offers if it was allowed under our municipal bylaws. Now, I know that we can't decide for Spruce Grove, but if I'm not mistaken, I do believe that powered bikes are included in their bylaw of similar nature, and so maybe something that we can look at as administration and bring back before second reading. And so I don't know if that's something I need to make a official motion to do before we go on here, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure what the process is, but would like to see e-bikes added into our bylaw.
Okay, so administration, there's possibly definitely some information coming back regarding e-bikes and how we add it into this bylaw if we choose to.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Anderson and the rest of council, certainly there's been enough dialogue around e-bikes and the particular types of battery-operated vehicles that are now frequenting our community that we will certainly go back and look at how we can define that and look at certain sections that might be impacted by those particular modes of transportation and how we might address it in the bylaw. Understanding that the Traffic Safety Act, the Traffic Safety Act is also going to include these particular vehicles at some point down the road. So we would do our best to understand when that legislation might be coming through so that we don't bring this bylaw back prematurely, like within 6 months sort of thing, to amend based on the Traffic Safety Act if they're that close to making amendments. So we would certainly reach out and find out what that timing might be, if possible at all. and then make some decisions around that and bring that information back to council during second and third reading.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can I carry on here just for a second? Thank you. No, I appreciate bringing the information back, and certainly if it's going to be changed at a provincial level within short order, I can certainly appreciate that. But if we're going to be looking at, a year plus out, that's certainly another summer season or spring, summer, fall season that residents would be able to utilize, those amenities within our community, and certainly something that I would like to see us consider. Second, and I think I jumped the gun here in questions, but would be looking maybe for some information from administration on the use of studded tires specifically within our community. And I can appreciate the dialogue around, chains and all of these other things. But if there are tires that are commercially available that can increase safety of our roadways for both drivers and pedestrians, I think it's worthwhile that we consider that, along with the impact on our roads. So I guess kind of twofold, a request to administration on the infrastructure side, but then also on the enforcement side. I do like what Mayor Choi had spoken to about sort of a seasonal allowance for those studded tires. I think that would make a lot of sense. But again, it's not something that I understand enough, to ask that it's permitted within our municipality, but would certainly like to hear some recommendations from administration going into the second reading.
Your Worship, just for clarity on that particular 3.22.0 metal spikes, likely we have to clear up some of the language within that particular section. I believe it's referencing driving a Traco down the road, driving a bulldozer down the road, and those more aggressive cleat systems that help drive vehicles versus not metal spikes, but studs on tires. There are a lot of people that use studded tires. We use studded tires in our own winter tires, and they shrink and they break down very quickly on the road system, and you have to replace them from time to time too. So we can do that research and have a look and see what we can find, but certainly I think this section is more referencing someone dropping a Traco off the back of a trailer and driving it down the middle of Main Street and causing tremendous impact to our asphalt systems. So the authorization by the town manager is likely through a development permit or some sort of permit related to the activities that require that type of equipment to be in a location, which is then provided to our CPO, so that enforcement is not conducted.
Yeah, perfect, and I certainly appreciate that. And so then just clarity then in this section, that would define what is allotted in terms of studded tires or otherwise. So thank you for the clarification there.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Lyons, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to follow up, if we found the wording you were looking for in regards to the 12 meters in length.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Lyons, I apologize, I've not been able to, just simply because we've been answering a number of questions.
Okay, just to add to that then, when you do find it, again, my curiosity was whether it's just the trailer that's that length, a truck and trailer, because utility trailers, flat decks can quite easily make a dually exceed 12 meters, depending on the length of the trailer. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Councilor Meyer, go ahead.
Just one to you. Would this be an appropriate time to ask then for more information regarding a 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limit, or am I waiting for discussion?
Yeah, yes, you can ask for information to bring it back, but it's not currently part of the bylaw.
Okay, well, so then I would just formally ask that administration bring back some more information regarding 40-kilometer speed limits in the community, maybe something specifically regarding communities in the region that are either considering or implementing, maybe regards to what measures would be required to make this change, and possibly even neighborhoods that would benefit the most. I'm thinking of Brookview in particular.
Okay, I think that might be just a little too broad for it to come back from that. I think definitely it's just the question is, how many other municipalities in a region are implementing 40 kilometers in residential zones? And then that'll be a debate amongst council if we add it or not.
Right.
Okay?
Your worship, just for clarity, that information likely is not something that we would bring back consistent with this bylaw. That's a separate item. Being that we do have 30 zones, 40 zones, 50, not 40 zones, 50 zones, 70 zones, 60 zones within our community now, of which are not captured in this particular bylaw. At any time, if we choose to put a 40 zone restriction in a particular neighborhood, we can go and put those signs up tomorrow morning if we want. And this bylaw would still be enforced as it is today, whether it was 50 kilometers an hour at midnight tonight or 40 kilometers an hour at 12:01 tomorrow morning. Peace officers would go out and verify the speed and give the violation related to the speed that's being traveled based on the posted speed limit in our community. So I think that's a separate report, which is not related necessarily to this bylaw, other than the fact that we would enforce speed limits posted in the community, and the decision of council to change speed limits in the community. This bylaw then comes into play when we're doing the enforcement part of a signed or posted speed limit.
Okay, so I think maybe the better avenue for this is to maybe have that information coming to council in preparation for our strat planning. As the fact that we as council can approve speed limit changes within our community, except for provincial highways, when it passes council. So we can talk about this in January, February, March next year, and then have it passed, and then after it's passed, the administration just changes the signing, and then we enforce it based on this. Is that what I'm understanding?
Your worship, yes, I think that would be a healthy conversation at a strategic planning session for council to have the conversation about speed limits, and perhaps we could do some work prior to that to illustrate some facts around what's happening in the region to further engage the dialogue or let the dialogue continue to move forward.
Good. Peter, I think that probably the better avenue to go. Councilor Meyer, is that all right?
Yeah, I'm satisfied with that.
Okay. Has the administration not marked that down for a conversation for strat planning?
Sorry, just to verbalize that, yes, your worship, we can track that.
Okay. Okay, so that's, any more questions for clear and understanding what, Councilor Pletchko?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Missing half of the conversation because I can't hear through the mic system. So I'm going to ask a question regarding 3.22.0. When we talk about metal spikes, as I read through that, it reminds me of the old days. Metal spikes that they used to put on the tractor wheels, big trucks, stuff like that. And I'm imagining the word lungs should be lugs. And cleats are bands. So I don't see anywhere in here, and I think Councillor Anderson was referring to studding on tires as a safety preventive maintenance. I don't see where we're talking about not allowing that. So I'm looking for clarity if I missed something in the conversation from what I read here to what Councillor Anderson was talking about.
Your worship, through to Councillor Pletchko. The last comment that we made related to 3.22.0 was perhaps there needed to be some clarity of definitions and wording because studded tires would not be captured in that. That's not, I don't believe that is the intention of that particular section. It's more the larger tractor tires that you're talking about or the cleated tracked, like a Traco, bulldozer, those types of things. So I think we can clean up that language related to, and maybe it's not metal spikes, it's something different, but I think this is not intended to say that in the winter you can't stud your tires and drive around Stony Plain.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think there's some clarity that needs to be dealt with. I think the general manager made a good point that this is for the larger vehicles, and I think in operations now within the town of Stony Plain, there are many people that do change over to studded winter tires. So I think the idea is not to not allow that. It is allowed, but we just need how to word it so that it is easily read and understood that that is allowed, but having big lugs and cleats and stuff for the bigger vehicles are not. I think that's... Okay, Councillor Anderson, go ahead.
Yeah, and thank you for the question there, Councillor Palechko. So just for clarity where the question came from, the verbiage of metal spikes, when I Google tire studs, the definition is a metal spike. And so just looking to clean up the language that exists as has been shared, but that was the root of the question, so, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And any other questions, comments for understanding? No. Okay, seeing none, I think most of my questions were asked, which was really good. But I do have a quick question here in terms of consistency in our bylaw. In some areas, we use millimeters. In other areas, we use kilograms and stuff. So are we mixing imperial and metric, or are we just going to standardize it so we're actually all metric? Because should it be pounds instead of kilograms? Or should it be inches instead of millimeters? Like, we're using two different measurements here. Okay. I'm just asking that question.
Your worship, just for clarity, when we go through this bylaw again, before we bring it back for second reading, we'll certainly go through and look at all of them and reference back to the legislation that we're trying to illustrate and the consistency that we're looking for in legislation. So if the legislation does state meters or millimeters, I think we're trying to keep that consistent language so that if you're reading the Provincial Act and then go into our bylaw, there's not a confusion between the different measurements if they're both the same in the same locations, in two different locations. But we certainly will go back and review weights, measures, lengths, and see if we can make it more consistent or use a single system.
Okay, I had a question, I was like, why do we use like millimeters on a couple of those comments on two things? So, I don't know, I haven't used millimeters in a long time. So I don't have that measuring stick with me. Centimeters. I use centimeters. Okay, any other questions for clear understanding before we move on? Because I think we did a good job of asking those questions. Okay, Councilor Lowry with the motion, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move the Town Council give first reading to Traffic Bylaw 2677/G/23.
Okay. Right, and then there's also, is there a public hearing on this? No? Okay, so we'll be coming back for a second and third reading after that then. Okay, any questions, comments on the debate to accept for first reading? Okay, just for administration, so a couple of questions that are not answered, will that be provided us prior to coming for second reading, or would it be provided for us at the same time as second reading?
Just for clarity, sorry, Your Worship, just for clarity, you're asking about the plethora of questions that were answered and clarity that's required in the second reading, or would you like a copy of that prior to the council meeting or at the council meeting? Is that the question, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, so a couple of the questions that are left outstanding. Will that be provided to councilor before the meeting or during the meeting?
Your Worship, certainly we'll look at yes, we'll go back and we'll provide those prior to, because I don't believe it changes the context of the bylaw. So we can get that information out to council through email.
Okay. Thank you. And that's it. Okay, any debate? See none, I'll call the question, all in favor? Okay, and that is carried. Okay, and let's call recess. We'll be back in 10 minutes before we go on to business items. Good job. All right, welcome back to the council meeting of today. We just took a little extra longer break just to make sure that we got our new mics all kind of working properly. It's always like with everything. It's great to change and get some new product. It's also, it's even better when we actually learn how to use it properly. So that's what we're trying to figure it out here. Members of council, moving back with our agenda number 9, looking at business items, 9.1, and it is the health and safety policy update. So go ahead, administration.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I will be presenting agenda item 9.1, which is the health and safety policy update. So this policy was due for administrative review in this past year and is now here before you. Safety is one of the core values of the organization, and the importance of having a solid safety culture and program cannot be understated. The goal of such a policy is to provide an overarching framework and set a safety tone that at a high level provides some fundamental standards, roles, and responsibilities from which the safety program can operate. There are no significant material changes from the previous policy. There were some enhancements and changes made to reflect updated occupational health and safety legislation and using some language from other benchmarking comparables. And some of the changes are as follows. 1.0 is the purpose is further enhanced to show the town commitment to overall our health and safety management system. The 2.0, the scope is simplified to just include worker, which is further refined in the definition section of 3.2. 3.0 are the definitions. They're further expanded and added employee health and safety management system, management in the town, and most of these come from the occupational health and safety legislation. 4 is the statement that values are people further enhanced by referencing occupational health and safety legislation. And 5, standards are where the greatest enhancement are found. 5.1 indicates the town commitment to safety according to standards outlined in the legislation. 5.2 indicates mayor and council support by providing funding through the corporate planning process to provide for the health and safety management system for which administration will control and operate. 5.4 indicates workers' shared responsibility to promote health and safety in the workplace. 5.5 indicates workers' responsibility to understand individual roles as it relates to occupational health and safety and being familiar with the manual. 5.6, workers are accountable to meet obligations per the health and safety management system. And also in your package, you'll notice we have included, we've made some enhancements to the health and safety commitment statement that you will see in frames in areas around the office and as well as other municipal facilities that act as important reminders to staff that the town is highly committed and prioritizes health and safety. This concludes my presentation and would be happy to hear any comments or questions.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation and the update of the health and safety policy. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding? Okay. The track changes, again, start on page 76. Okay. Councilor Pletchko, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to refer to page 72 of the regular council meeting, the executive summary, the recommendation, and background. I'm just wondering if administration can provide what they mean by providing adequate funding for a robust health and safety program. The word adequate means what to who?
Okay, go ahead.
Through your worship to Councillor Pletchko, I'd best describe adequate as appropriate to make sure all of our individuals make it home safely every night.
Okay.
I thank you for that, but so adequate to me, I think, means different things to each one of us sitting at this council chamber. And that has me a bit concerned because you basically say town council's role is to support the health and safety program by providing adequate funding for a robust health and safety program. I think for me, providing funding for a robust health and safety program provides better funding than adequate, because adequate can be determined by a number of people what that may or may not look like. And if we do have an incident, did council provide adequate funding, or were we provided adequate information to adequately decide what was done? So that's my only concern.
Okay, in terms of comment, adequate.
So through your worship to Councillor Paleckko, I would say that adequate amount would be provided through the corporate planning process, through the budget process that would be presented before you. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. And I think the word adequate doesn't need to be in there. I think council will provide funding. So I don't think that is a question of adequate.
Your worship, maybe too for clarification, I believe inside the policy, the term adequate isn't included. I believe it just says set funding priorities and so on. And, I would acknowledge that, adequate, you're right, is a subjective term. And I think its usage in the written report or the RFD is one thing, but it does not show up in the actual policy. As Councillor Paleckko kind of commented on, should something happen or not happen or get questioned or get called, the terminology of adequate would not be something that would be held up as a standard.
Follow up on that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, General Manager. I looked through that policy and did not see that term either, so I appreciate that as an answer as well. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for bringing the policy forward. I'm going to look to Councillor Paleckko just to make sure he can hear me. This is a new system, and I think I was talking into the side, not directly into it. So appreciate that. Just concerned about something that maybe is missing here, and so maybe looking for some context as to why it may not be present, and that is the duty or responsibility of workers to report unsafe working conditions. Looking here, page 75, 5.4 under standards, shared responsibility to promote health and safety, obligation to assist in preventing, and where necessary, correcting unsafe conditions and situations, but nothing related to an obligation to report. And along with that, I think it would be important that as council we have a policy that there's an obligation or a duty to report, which is the OHS standard, but without fear of repercussion. And so maybe some commentary as to why we may not see that here.
Through your worship to Councillor Anderson. So we do have an occupational health and safety policy that's administrative supported. So we do actually have that as part of our training and part of our protocols. We have a very, very, I would say, robust program and manual. And so I hope that answers your question. This is just a really high level sort of a policy statement, but within our own policy for administration, we do actually have all of that outlined as what our responsibilities are.
Okay, thank you for that. So just, I'm going to ask two questions for clarification. One being within our worker policy and procedure manual, whatever that might be, there is a statement in there that has an obligation to report, question number one. And two, there's a statement there that informs municipal staff that they will be able to report without fear of repercussion.
Through your worship to Councillor Anderson, yes and yes to both those questions.
Thank you.
Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to follow along on that kind of topic here for a second, because those were things that stood out to me as well. The General Manager just mentioned about this kind of being that overall statement, and the intention of this policy was to be that kind of overarching high level. I would argue that the duty to report should exist in this. Because a duty to report is probably one of the most important aspects of a safety policy. If nobody is reporting unsafe practices that are being either undertaken or unsafe equipment that exists, you know, to me, it's a little, and I'm very happy to hear we do have it in the administrative side of the policy. I'm just not sure why that wouldn't kind of make it up to here. And the other question that I have through you, your worship, to administration, and again, Councillor Anderson kind of touched on it, I've talked about it a little bit in the past, is in regards to a whistleblower policy. It's something that has become very common in many corporations, municipalities, different levels of government. I'm just curious if we can get a little context as to if a whistleblower policy is something that has been considered for the town of Stony Plain, and if not, maybe why not?
Go ahead.
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie, as far as the obligations or the responsibilities, there's a lot of other responsibilities that are in the manual, like even under management, that isn't outlined specifically to that. It's really just to provide in each of those sort of management and employee type of categorization that it's just really on a high level. I totally wholeheartedly agree with your comment about workers' responsibility to report, and that's fundamental. But there are a lot of other responsibilities that if we're going to go down that path, then they would be outlined in this higher level overarching policy as well, and not to mention some of the other items that would also fall under management, for example. So, and it wasn't meant to be prescriptive in that manner. As far as the whistleblower policy is concerned, I believe that that has been a very common trend that has been coming through in municipal practices. I think that's something that we could look at, but I know as important as anything, we are working through our violence in the workplace policy, and that's really a lot of the reporting mechanisms built into that part of it. So maybe do you want to speak to this one? I'll let the town manager speak to the rest.
Yeah, there's a couple things that just comment on along the lines of the question, Your Worship, and to the rest of council. So, duty to report is one aspect. The other significant OHS, foundational, is the right to refuse unsafe work, and I don't believe that shows up specifically in this council-related policy. Perhaps it could, but part of the notion is that, in this particular aspect, the Act and the Code and the regs sort of supersedes a number of everything, whether we have it or not. We're all governed by, as an employer, we're governed by the OHS Act, Code and regs. So I think that's part of the, I don't know if I say that's part of the rationale, I would just say that's part of the background. That's the other pretty important aspect of any OHS program, is that staff have the understanding, the knowledge, and the notion that they have the right to refuse unsafe work. And, I do know that anybody that starts with the town of Stony Plain within a set amount of time typically has a number of different OHS-related trainings, depending on their workplace and so on and so forth. That's all part of what I believe in here is referred to as the HSMS, the Health and Safety Management Program, that outlines all of that. And that is part of the training and the information that's provided by our OHS officer, but more importantly by leadership, again, starting at the council through my position, through GMs to supervisors and so on, and down the path there. So I'll stop there on that particular aspect of it. As it relates to whistleblower policies, there's been some dialogue within the organization, some commentary from time to time at a council level, I would say, would be part of the background I would provide there, I guess, to all involved. At this point in time, that's not something that's been brought forward, through our normal course of practice. Just on that note, I would comment that, should anyone be willing to look at those, there is you know, I mean, I would say that there's a fair amount of work and perspective that has to go into that particular question and process being developed.
So, if I may, Your Worship? So thank you for the feedback on that. And, you know, where I get a little hung up is when you look at the policies review chart on page 72, it reviewed, was it 5, 6, 7, 8 different municipalities. And of those 8 municipalities, only 3 of them actually even have the health and safety policy as a council policy. The rest have it as an administrative policy. When I read through why this policy exists, it talks about to reinforce individual roles and identify how the town, council, management, and workers will support the program. But what I'm hearing is that a majority, if not all of this, is identified in our administrative policies. So do we have a redundant policy then? Is this policy really even necessary? And, you know, when we're talking about something as simple as that, you know, exactly, there's hundreds of different things considered in safety that could be noted. So how do we pick and choose what is important to be noted? Should this policy simply just consist of 5.2 if it's a council level policy and only state what mayor and council's responsibility is for the health and safety program? Do we need the rest of this in here if it's all covered in administrative policy?
Your Worship, I could certainly speak to maybe a portion of that question from Councillor Laurie. So the initial question being, you know, council policy versus administration policy, that's a question that we often ask on any given item that may come before, frankly, council or administration. And we try to weigh both pros and cons. You know, what's the rationale? Does it have to be in the chambers? Does it not? How often is it changed? You know, if I can maybe digress a little bit, if council may be familiar with, every once in a while we come into the chambers to essentially knock off the books a lot of policies that at one point were council policies. One of the challenge when it is a council policy is it's frankly a little more difficult to change and doesn't react as fast to the world around us. So what part of the, you know, I mean, broad, you know, perspective, I guess, or process that's been undertaken over probably the last 5 or 6 years here in this organization is, you know, there are certain things, and OHS, I would say, is one where it is important that council has a line of sight and stands up to and brings forward or has a place in the, you know, I mean, leading the overall safety of the organization. And how does that work? What does that look like? Well, you know, I mean, part of the answer to that is what's in front of council this evening. Other policies may not have quite as much, you know, impact is one way to put it. But so sometimes, I guess, part of the answer is that it's not an exact science. Sometimes it's a little bit of history in an organization or the perspectives that have come from the past and how are we changing and evolving. But I do think OHS is one where, you know, I mean, that statement that goes up on the wall that says, you know, signed by, so to speak, the mayor of the day and the CEO of the day speaks to that joint leadership. So that's, I think I'll stop there and just check in if I was answering the question posed. Okay. And how is my volume going? I guess I'll ask at the same time. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, and thank you for those comments and those questions from definitely 3 members of council that have spoken already. As a council policy, I think 5.4 does address some of the conditions that we're asking about, making sure that there is the ability to report and the ability that there are no repercussions if an employee does report something, as workers are shared responsibility to promote health and safety in the workplace and has obligation to assist in preventing and anywhere necessary correcting unsafe conditions and situations. I think that's the overarching goal that we want to be aware of as a council, is that that is wraparound. Okay. Any other questions for clarity and understanding? Okay. In terms of, acceptance, because this is a review, the next review date is in 2026. As mentioned earlier by Councilor Laurie, that when they did policy review, that a fair amount of them have gone administrative policy versus a council policy. Is that, in a couple of years, is that something that we can strive towards in terms of moving it to an administrative policy? If, like I said, I think the town manager mentioned that, you know, it's a little bit of history, a little bit how we do things. So let's correct what we are kind of lacking in the old policy and then move it in, then in a couple of years we come back and says, you know what, council, we ask you to dissolve this policy because now we moved it internally.
Through your worship, yes, that'll be something we consider in 2026, just as we considered it this year. If we see more trends going towards that direction, then certainly if it makes sense for us as an organization, then we will look to do that.
Okay, and at that time in 2026, that council may have the opinion, everything should be a council policy versus administrative policy. We don't know, so we'll cross that bridge when it comes back. Okay, any other questions of clarity and understanding? Councilor Anderson?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak a second time. I am just listening to the conversation, and there's some pieces that I'm having a little bit of a tough time reconciling for myself, so I'm just going to offer some thoughts, and then you know, we can take that for what it is. But one, I think from a council perspective, I actually appreciate under purpose and under the definitions there when it talks about the health, safety, or health and safety management systems, the emphasis that's placed on not just physical, which we often think about, but psychological and social well-being of our workers or of our municipal staff. And I do feel like that is an important thing for us as council to let municipal employees know that right from a council level that there is this strong desire and commitment to ensuring the safety on all these levels of anybody that works for the municipality. You know, I'm going to come back to the previous conversation a little bit that's been alluded to a couple of times, but you know, I do feel after listening to some of the dialogue that as a council policy, this would be a good place for us to have a point about you know, the obligation to report without fear of repercussions. And you know, for an employee in an organization, you know, we can say that and have it in our policy and procedure manual, but that only goes as far as, you know, their supervisor or management team, you know, within the organization. But if there's accountability from the top down to say, you know, this is a priority for us as an organization, this is a priority for us at a governance level, and we're going to hold the CAO through his leadership down accountable to ensure that staff do feel comfortable and confident reporting those sort of situations that may put themselves or somebody else at risk. And so, you know, I do appreciate that it is a council policy, but I come back to that previous comment that I personally feel like there is that piece missing. And so that's my thoughts.
Okay. So Councilor Anderson, with that, you definitely if you can put that on a hold for a second, as soon as I accept the motion to debate it, then you're welcome to make an amendment to add that on until maybe 5.6 or 5.7, and that can be debated on in terms as an amendment. Okay. Councilor Plechko?
I know you hit that right on the head. That's where I was going to take it. I think there's a great opportunity for this to be added in at this point in time, and I think there's many of us here that feel that that's a well-needed policy. So I'll look forward to it coming at 5.5 or 5.6.
Thank you. Councilor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question of clarity in regards to points 5.5 and 5.6, looking at page 75. 5.5 reads, workers are responsible to review the OHS manual, understand individual roles and responsibilities. And the next sentence follows, workers will be held accountable to meet these obligations per the HSMS. And then 5.6 is the exact same sentence. Workers will be held accountable to meet these obligations as per the HSMS. Is there just a clerical error there, or is there a different meaning to 5.6 than the second sentence of 5.5?
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie, yes, that would be a correction required. It does look like there's a double up there for sure.
All right, so that leaves 5.6 open, Councillor Anderson. Any more questions for clarity and understanding before I move on to the question? Nope. Okay. Councillor Hansard, for the motion, please.
Your Worship, I move that Town Council approve Health and Safety Policy CHS 060 and repeal Health and Safety Policy CHS 035.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Hansard. And with that being on the table, there are some good questions about clear and understanding and some comments. So, Councillor Anderson, I'll go to you first.
I was just working on my wording here. So if there's some other thoughts first, I'll work on some wording of a proposed amendment.
Just kidding. Councillor Laurie. Nothing, we just.
Thank you, Your Worship. Maybe to help Councillor Anderson here, I'm looking at 5.4, where it says workers have a shared responsibility to promote health and safety in the workplace and have an obligation to assist in preventing and, where necessary, correcting unsafe conditions and situations. I would maybe recommend that the wording be changed to preventing, reporting, and, where necessary, correcting unsafe conditions and situations. And then maybe 5.6 could be changed to say something along the lines of all workers will be protected for reporting any issues in regards to health and safety, or I'm not very good at wordsmithing that, but I think 5.4 would be very easy to add reporting after preventing.
Thank you. So under 5.4, there will be a motion that the amendment to add the word reporting. So the obligation to assist in preventing and reporting. So it'll be an and reporting. Oh no, just comma, reporting and. Okay, that is good. And then 5.6 is a duplicate, so we're going to erase that. And then with the wordsmith from Councillor Anderson, we'll add word 5.6 to that as an amendment before we vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just looking at the Alberta OH&S legislation to see the wording around the protection for employers' rights in regards to reporting.
Can it be as simple as any workers that will suffer no repercussions from reporting an unsafe work environment? I think that was the whole gist of the conversation, was that that they're able to freely report an unsafe work condition without repercussions. Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, sounds good. So administration, if you can make those two amendments.
Thank you, Your Worship, we will.
Okay, so members of council, that those amendments have been accepted. So those are the 2 points that we're talking about. So again, and the vote will be on the amendment itself and not the original motion. So the amendment would be on 5.4 to add the word reporting after preventing. And then also 5.6, where that wording has been stricken out, and it will be now, it'll read that workers will suffer no repercussions for reporting an unsafe work environment. Okay, the floor is open for that debate on that amendment. Okay, seeing no debate, Councillor Anderson? To close?
I have no further comments.
Okay, I'll call the question on the amendment. All in favor? Okay, and that's carried. Okay, with that amendment being carried, we're going back to the motion, so it'll be as amended. However, Part 2 of the motion still stands, as it is still going to repeal the old health and safety policy. Okay. Any debate on the approval of the new health and safety policy as amended? Okay, Councillor Meyer?
Thank you, Your Worship. Maybe this should have been asked during questions of clarity, but I'm curious, because I take exception to this idea that we can guarantee or help some certain psychological or social safety. So I'm curious what we mean by those words, because I wonder if one person's psychological health may intrude upon another person's ability to express themselves. And I think those, in this day and age, come into conflict quite often. And so while somebody might be psychologically harmed by somebody else's opinion, which in a case like that, where do we draw the appropriate line to someone's ability to express themselves and someone's ability to be psychologically protected from somebody else's opinion?
Okay. To administration, then, that's a question raised about somebody's ability to provide opinion and risk the ability to hurt somebody unintentionally because you expressed your opinion. Is that?
Basically, yeah.
Your Worship, certainly I can provide some commentary there. I frankly will not be able to specifically answer that particular question. There is, the wording on that particular clause, I think it's in the purpose, so to speak, is pulled from the Act. So the Act does include psychological and social as part of the I don't know if I'll put the right words to it, but it is included as part of the statutory regulation and code. And again, as I mentioned, Your Worship, I won't sit before you and say that I can answer that specific question, but I will comment and provide an acknowledgement that can be a challenge in any workplace. We do provide and have provided some training to our staff on how to conduct yourself in a workplace, to potentially not bully, harass, use words that some may take take a certain way, and so on. And we have had those particular questions come up, and being brought forward to supervisors and human resources as to ageism and so on, and other potential challenges on a psychological or social aspect. I won't sit here and tell Mayor and Council that we've got that all figured out, or that we know exactly how to handle every particular situation like that. I think what is being demonstrated here, and what we try to demonstrate, is that we're going to actively see and listen and hear and try to work those challenges through when they do come up. But I certainly can't say that there's a specific answer that I can provide as to how each one of those interactions may or may not play out. I'll stop there, Your Worship. Again, that was some perspective or context on what has in the workplace become more aware and has the potential to become challenging in many different ways. But I think the idea, the notion, is that everybody feels has a not just physically safer or physically safe, so to speak, that more traditional perspective on safety in the workplace, but it is an acknowledgement of a shift towards psychological and social aspects as well. I'll stop there, Your Worship.
Okay. Thank you. I think that just comes back to what our staff and some members of council have taken as the bullying in the workplace and how to manage those issues. I think the ability to have your own opinion is good. I think the underlying is how you use that, and if there is kind of more of it used as a tactic to bully and intimidate somebody with your opinion. And I think as the town manager mentioned, that that is something that nobody will get right away, and there's nothing that we can do to prevent it because everyone's allowed to have their opinion. Right? And this is how it's communicated in a manner that is communicated. Any other questions, comments regarding the debate on the approval? Okay, see none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that's carried. Okay, move on to 9.2, and which is the organizational development strategy. And I think this is coming from the Office of the CEO. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. This item, before he seeks to provide some information related to a process that has been undertaken over the past 8 weeks and builds from a council query that arose this past June. The query related to turnover rates with an open-ended consideration of annual reporting to ensure council as a governing body was aware of and involved with any high-level opportunities or concerns. With this in mind, Your Worship, I made a decision to engage a consultant to work with council and administration to refine and develop a governance aspect to organizational development. Noted within the report, the RFD in front of council, there is a bit of a diagram there that speaks to hindsight, oversight, and foresight. And that notion, Your Worship, probably speaks a bit to the governance side, the governance role for whether it's an elected body or a corporate body to meaningfully guide the organizational development strategies as they relate to the broader strategy. Your Worship, in the report, a couple initial objectives of the exercise would be the development of some overarching philosophies and principles to tie together and guide strategies along with the development of quarterly and annual reporting to ensure council as a governance body is able to fulfill the roles noted in that hindsight, oversight, foresight perspective. Your Worship, also contained within the report is a circle diagram that illustrates certain aspects of organizational development strategy. And shows a tie into the strategic plan or some of the notes from the strategic plan. Specifically noted in that diagram is the area that would be considered within a governance role, and these are the areas that council will be engaged to develop in collaboration with administration. Your Worship, a couple other comments. The work with the consultant is set to take place over the course of the calendar year and into Q1 and Q2. And council engagement side of that would be taking place in Q4 of this calendar year, Q4 2023. Your Worship, it's certainly an opportunity. It's something I would look forward to engaging with council on. Again, this particular organization over a number of years has a number of things in place, both supporting training and our people policies and so on and so forth. And there is some higher level stuff that's in place to kind of outline principles and considerations that way. But what I would look forward to is an opportunity to engage with council and senior staff to put some time and focus onto the philosophies that would, then trickle into and guide the policies that would roll throughout the organization. I think it's an opportunity for collaboration to really work on some foundational stuff that can, point the organization in a good direction. Your Worship, I'll make one more comment along those lines. I think it's another opportunity for the town of Stony Plain as an organization to set ourselves apart from some of our comparators and to really take a lead on the governance role for an elected body within organizational development strategies. So, Your Worship, I'll leave my initial comments at that. I'm certainly able to speak further on this if council wishes to do so.
Thank you for the presentation and the members of council. Again, this is coming out of the motion that was made by Councilor Laurie. Again, the conversation around what our role is in terms of governance of how we look at our organization structure. Like being able to see this and actually have a hand into kind of working to see where we want to be. I think looking at our strategic plan, we're looking at the next iteration of the town of Stony Plain when we're 30,000 people. And I think this is an appropriate time to review it as we continue to grow from 19,000 today to 30,000 in a few years. So having that ability as a council to weigh into it and how we want to see and manage our community and our organization. Members of council, questions for clear understanding? Councilor Lowry, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to the town manager for the information, the presentation, and the report that's contained in front of us. I'm encouraged that there will be work going on with a consultant over the next year to create, I guess, some good policies, some good practices, some good reporting, and so on. But I'm still a little bit confused. So, for instance, on page 85, we have a chart that shows the average permanent and temporary employees, the departures, and what percentage of staff that was. Just a couple simple questions on this that instantly pop out is, in 2019, we had an average of 181 employees, but in 2023, we're trending an average of 158 employees. But during that time, I recall through corporate planning, we added additional staff positions. So I'm perplexed on how we could average 181 and now be down to 158. And then also, while it's great to have these percentages, what's the context in that percentage comparative to an average municipality? Are we within? I mean, I look at 12.6% this year, 18.7% last year, and I see those as potentially troubling numbers. But I don't know if they are or not, because I don't know what a comparable municipality's numbers would be. Is this the normal for a municipal environment? Is it above? Is it below? And then I also see that we exclude seasonal and casual fire staff. Seasonal staff I can kind of understand. Casual fire staff, though, I don't really, because we recruit and employ them on a casual basis, but their method of employment is more, I would liken it to a full-time employment. We want those people to stick around. We're not anticipating that a casual hire for a fire department is only going to be here for a few months. The dollars invested into training and preparation for that person, I would anticipate that our desire would be that that person is going to stick around for a fair amount of time. So maybe just a couple of those points, and then just further on that, again, I asked some very specific questions in the follow-up email that I sent, and I'm curious if we will be receiving the answers to those questions as it sits now, or if these questions will remain unanswered until we finally get the first report from the consultant.
Thank you for the question there. I can maybe speak to some of it. So I think the fluctuation on the amount of employees it is a fluctuation based on some of the temporary positions that can be there, some of the seasonal ones and so on and so forth. And I think that's part of the shift in numbers. The question regarding comparator rates, I know that our staff are working on those. They have reached out. There's a HR collaborative group kind of thing, and some of those are coming together. So we anticipate to have some of that in front of us in the relative near term. As to the other questions that were posed, I would look to seek to start working through some of those questions and some of those answers and providing that as part of the dialogue. But at this point in time, I think part of the notion that I kind of sat back and thought through was essentially that what is the context and what are the understandings and what is that broader perspective and philosophy. And I would believe, I guess, part of my thought there is that that's not entirely sure and shared. And, I believe there's some effort that needs to be put into doing that, and following that call what you want, exercise or process or whatever. That context will start to shape out, and the numbers can then therefore sit within that context and be relative to the goals, so to speak. I'll stop there, Your Worship, again, just to check in to see if there's anything further followed up or whatever.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just maybe a point of clarity as you went through that. And again, I agree with the forward-looking presentation that we've received. I think this will create a great process, and I think we will gain value out of it, and it will be something that will be good for the organization going forward as we grow. But the comment about entirely sure and shared, about the views, the requirements, all that entirely sure and shared, I guess, by whom? Now, this was a question that was asked in council discussion. It wasn't a motion, but I'd certainly be willing to consider making it a motion to get the answers to the questions that were asked, if that is what is required. And then the entirely sure and shared by whom could be determined by council as to whether we feel that the answers to those questions sooner rather than later is or is not important.
Yeah, I think I'd like to just weigh into this. Again, this is about what our role is in terms of governance and not management. So we want to understand what we want to do, what we want to provide for our residents and our organization and our employees, and how do we review that. I think it's better done as a workshop for that. All members of council has the ability to weigh into that. There was a motion passed to review that, but in terms of individual members and who's leaving, all that stuff, that can be addressed at the workshop level where we actually understand who's leaving and et cetera, not at this level in terms of the governance level.
So thank you, Your Worship. So when can we expect that first workshop to be scheduled?
Yeah.
Hi, Your Worship. We're just going to double check the list in front of me here. The projected dates are, September, October. Not specific dates at this point in time, but that's the intended timeline with the council engagement sessions.
Right, and that's the fourth quarter of 2023. Right. Okay. Okay. So on page 84, it says council engagement will take place through Q4 of 2023. Okay, any more questions for clarity? Councilor Pletchko?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate all the questions that you bring forward, Councilor Laurie, because as I read through this report at first, I didn't feel that it pertained to anything that we had asked in council chambers at that point in time. I felt this was a bit vague into where it was, and I'm still a bit vague as to the consultation process. Is this a consultation process that we as council and administration will be taking, or is this a process that allows council to have time with a consultant to work through some of the things that we consider and then to bring in the administration side of it?
Your Worship, for clarity, the intention is that this would be an engagement process involving council, myself, and SLT to work towards a shared, values and principles for the organization.
Okay. And at that time, then there's again. In terms of talk about legal labor, that should be an in-camera session or not a public session where we talk about personnel matters. Okay. Councillor Hanson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Sorry. Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. In reading my council package, I actually read through the whole thing and then didn't realize that this piece actually was addressing these questions. So I went back and I pulled up the questions and printed them so I could read them again. And it made me think about a couple of things. And I often wonder, has council, through our budget process, enabled our CAO and our senior leadership team to have the best people we can get and keep the best people we can keep by providing proper funding so that we're not always quote, the training ground, and then people go on to another municipality. We certainly have played that role in the past, but it perhaps, some of this may lie in budget process. And it may be affected in that process in several ways. A really heavy workload that are being shared by people who are maybe doing more than one or two, sometimes even three jobs or pieces of three people's jobs that make them feel very stressed. When there's turnover in an organization, there's always reasons, there's always answers. And so we're going into our budget process this year. Do we need to look at ourselves? Do we need to look at our own budget to make sure we're providing what we need to provide to enable our CAO and our general managers to keep our good people? I'm reminded that, well, I grew up in a military household, the United States Air Force. I can remember my father telling me, because he was in senior management, that they did everything they could to keep the airmen who came into the organization, no matter what rank they were reached in the organization, they wanted to keep them, if at all possible. They didn't want them to pass out the door to go to the public sector and make more money using all the skills and training and experience that they had gained in the Air Force, because there was often a question, why can't we keep them here to do this vital job? By the time a person reaches 20 years, which isn't a full career, but you can retire with a decent rate of pay at 20 years. If those people, if those airmen walked out the door at 20 years, the value of each one of those people was $1 million. If they stayed another 10 years to reach a 30-year career, the day they walked out the door, their value had increased to $2 million. Now you might ask, why is she using this obscure example that has absolutely nothing to do with the town of Stony Plain? And my response would be, maybe it does have something to do with the town of Stony Plain. When we have people come into our organization, I know that there's been thought and consideration and better brains than mine around hiring people to bring them into this organization. Now, how do we keep them here? And that's what I was hoping I was going to hear back from this report, and maybe we'll get to that in our consultation process. Is there something more needed? Is there something less needed? I don't want to lose our people. There's a certain comfort in the house when we come in and our familiar faces are here, and we feel like we're coming to work with our second family. And my goal, it's not my management goal, I don't have a management role here. But my goal would be to provide whatever is necessary within reason to try to give the tools to our leadership to keep good people with our organization. So what I've said doesn't really answer any of these questions, but it gives a little bit of an idea about where my brain is when I'm looking at how do we keep the better people here? There will be people who will come and go. We can't stop all of that. But there's some who leave that absolutely pains the heart. And we know that some of these people leaving is not good for our organization. So I'm looking forward to whatever the process is that our CAO has in store for us, so that we can sit down and talk about things that we could improve upon. And how do we go back to, and I'll say back, because certainly the culture in our town office and our town organization has not always been perfect. I've seen it be great and I've seen it be not so great. But for sure, we want to make it the best we can so that we don't lose our senior leadership team. I view these people as worth their $2 million. And so we need to find a way to keep them here so that they have their career here with the town of Stony Plain and continue to deliver the outstanding, excellent service and attitude and leadership that's needed to grow an organization to take care of the town that we're trying to grow to 30,000 people in a mere few years. If we're going to do that, we can't have constant turnover. So that is where my mind and my heart are. And that is my goal for my term here on council. What is needed of me as a councilor, and how much persuasive power do I have to exercise on this council's desk in order to make that happen? Because this is something I am deadly serious about, and grateful to Councilor Laurie for bringing questions to the plate, to the table, that make us realize we could be doing something perhaps better. And if there's absolutely nothing we can do about some people leaving, then that's the way it'll have to be. But we can make things better. We always can, and we will, because we're growing to 30,000 people and we need to be better. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Councilor Hanson, and I definitely appreciate those comments. Again, that's very wise to look at, and I appreciate you pointing out the differences of our role in council. I think the biggest issue that I see with organizations is that governance needs to know the role, and administration needs to know the role. And our role is governance. So I think you mentioned the total compensation of what we can do to maintain the employees as long as possible, so don't lose that experience, don't lose that knowledge. Our role is not to decide how much they get paid or who should get hired. It's to develop that structure, the organization, the people and the culture, and the philosophy. For example, you mentioned dollars and cents. You know, the philosophy for Town of Stony Plain in terms of compensation has been, we do the evaluation and we want to be around the 50 percentile mark. Right? That's a conversation we need to have at this workshop is that still adequate? Or do we need to be up to the 60% mark or the 70% mark? Right? That's why it's not as easy to answer as, well, just tell me who left and why. Well, that's a personnel issue. That's not a governance issue. If there's a governance issue, we will deal with it, and hopefully that we do bring that up at the workshop, and we actually pull those strings to figure it out. And as Councillor Hanson said, to make this the best place for somebody to work. We are going to have change. That's a given. If you look at our proximity to everything, you have 13 municipalities where somebody can go from this municipality to any one of 13 and maybe get a higher paying job for the same role, less work. It's all there. But it is the total culture and how do we keep it that way, Councillor Hanson. So thank you for those comments.
Thank you, Your Worship. One other comment I'll make, given what you just said. One other comment I'll make, given what you just said. Your Worship, it's not always about money. A lot of times it's about making people, every single person, realize how much they are appreciated, and even appreciated by council. When we aren't taking time to pass through and tell people how much we appreciate them and how much it means to us, that they make us look awfully good out in the public. They make our job so much easier. And we need to convey that to them, each and every one of them. I don't care what the role, but we have to be free to be able to say those things and let people know that. And we can convey it as a whole council. We can convey it through our CAO and senior leadership team. And we also can convey it our very selves in the way we look at people, interact with people, show up for people, and let them know we care.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Pletchko.
Yes, thank you, Worship, and I appreciate each one of the comments that I've heard here tonight. But I still sit here with a bit of troubledness with what we've got before us today, and how the process will work. We're still on a long road to putting something in place that will benefit the culture of our community and employees. And I think by defining, accepting something just for information is not doing a world of good. We have a bit of a plan in place. I think we need to put action to that plan and have timelines that are attached to it. So if you can provide a bit of guidance as to how we would go about that, I would be all ears.
Okay, I believe that the timeline is reported on the background information. So if administration can provide that timeline and timeframe of when we plan to be addressing all this, because I believe that I think the report, the council involvement and engagement will start on Q4 2023, and then the project is to unfold in 2024, Q1, Q2, and then probably Q3 would be when it's reported. Administration?
Yeah, Your Worship, I could certainly speak to that in the timeline and what's, generally considered as part of that. So, council engagement taking place, I think as I mentioned, through the remainder of this calendar year, September, October, and that will be part of the setting, understanding, discussing the principles, philosophies through again, of course, the next 6, 8, 10 weeks kind of thing is when council would get that direct engagement. From that, there may be some changes to the way, council policy on this, could be drafted up, so on and so forth. But the longer side of it, or the stuff that would push out into the Q2, I believe, in 2024, is the changes in or guidance council gives through that philosophy and principle. How does that affect the policies that are currently in place? And I think there was some allusion to it earlier about should council adopt a philosophy or perspective or a principle about, wanting to take a more aggressive stance in the marketplace related to pay. And I don't want to presuppose anything, but it's an easy one to note it earlier. Then certain other policies and procedures have to be changed. So the back end of the timeline is, implementing changes that council has seen fit through the principles and philosophies to do, which would be done prior to the end of this calendar year.
Okay, so just to follow up on that question then, in terms of council engagement that will take place in Q4, does that mean just one engagement period, or is there, if we need more?
The general proposal at this point would be essentially 2 working sessions of sorts, and then some earlier follow-up in the calendar year 2024. To say here's where is what's being looked at and can change, ultimately culminating with some sort of policy changes that would be required in the council chambers for debate.
Okay, and then policy changes, then that will take we can actually implement that for the next corporate plan, which is November 24th for the 25 corporate plan.
Correct.
Right, because we're not going to make any changes now in terms of compensation and the total compensation package.
Not intended at this time, no.
Okay. Councilor Pletchko?
Nothing more at this time.
Members Council, Councilor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly appreciate the dialogue around the table this evening, and want to echo what's been shared in terms of our desire to be an employer of choice, if you will. When we put a posting out there because we have an open position that, there's a lineup of people that want to be employed here because we've built a reputation of recruiting strong people, but not just recruiting, but providing opportunity for professional development and growth and lifelong learning, and that they want to retain their employment with us. And so, I know that that's a shared vision, and I look forward to seeing how this plays out and gets to us to a place, as a municipality, where we can accomplish that goal that, you do say it in whispers, but if somebody's applying to Spruce Grove and Stony Plain and they're offered both jobs, that they choose us, because we have a reputation that people want to be here. And that is certainly our hope. I'm going to pick up on a question that Councillor Laurie asked at the very beginning, and this is just for my clarity and understanding. So looking at the chart here, again, page 85 of our agenda package, if we, actually, let me just ask the question. What is on our organizational chart, if you will? We looked at our whole municipal staffing allotment. How many FTEs do we currently have that have been approved and are on the books?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Anderson, the average permanent temp 6 months, that would be fairly close to the current FTE count. So that would include, again, full-time, but then a number of different 0.8s and 0.5s and so on.
Okay, so we're not looking at, 158 people currently employed, but we're actively recruiting for additional positions. This is 158 positions that may or may not be filled at any given time. Is that accurate?
Sorry, Your Worship, just reword the last part.
Yeah, my apologies. So is the 158 our FTE allotment? And maybe today, as an example, we have 155 because we, hypothetically have 3 positions posted, or is 158 bodies sort of in the room, so to speak, in terms of our current staffing complement?
Yeah, Your Worship, I believe the answer is yes to that. That's the equivalent number to, I believe, what you're saying.
Okay, so I'm going to maybe ask actually the same question then that Councillor Laurie asked. And that's, over the years, we've continued to approve new positions. We've excluded seasonal staff from here, so it's not that in 2019 we had 23 more seasonal staff, but we see that we would be the equivalent of 181 full-time equivalent positions within the municipality, and now we have 158, and so we actually have lost 23 staffing positions. And so I'm just trying to make sense of the data that we see, because since 2017, the first half of this year, we actually have our lowest staffing complement that we've had in the last 6 years. And so I'm trying to make sense of the numbers that exist here before us. And so maybe just looking for a little bit of clarity, maybe a little more information to what had been shared when Councillor Laurie asked a similar question, because I'm still not understanding how there can be such a large variance when new positions have been added year over year.
Yeah.
So let's make this a little bit clearer. So in terms of our corporate plan, we approved a org structure or a number of people, FTEs, when we actually approved the corporate plan. So this again, January to June of 2023 is inaccurate because it's only 6 months. So I think the question is, in the full year of 2023, how many FTEs is that? Would that be? Is it going to be 158 at the end of the year, or is it going to be 170, or is it 179? Like, definitely there's going to be some vacancies to people moving back and forth, et cetera. Yeah, so vacancies.
But vacancies shouldn't come into it, because we're hearing that these are the FTE positions, not the number of bodies in the room. And so that's where the number's confusing for me. If we're talking about bodies in the room, that's different. If we're talking about what are the FTEs that have been approved through the corporate plan, I'm trying to understand why we have a reduction of 23 full-time equivalent positions over a 4-year period.
Right. So back to the what is it? The corporate plan. We approved the organizational structure that has a number of FTEs. So I think the question is, how many FTEs, so we can actually answer this question.
Yeah, Your Worship, and I appreciate the question. I think this is also part of the reasoning to hold workshops where we can get specifically into what some of these are, what some of them aren't. What drives the changes? What are they up? What are they down? Your Worship, just to comment. I'm not able to or able to at this point in time sit and specifically speak to. Which one, 158 versus 171 versus 173. These are the numbers that we tracked that were provided on this aspect of it. And I can see the general manager's pulling up some numbers there too. But, the basic notion, Your Worship, is to bring all of this together and have a conversation, have a dialogue, and create that shared understanding, and move forward at that policy and philosophical level to achieve the goals that have been mentioned tonight. But I think that we all generally share when we think of the type of organization that we see in front of us. Your Worship, if I can go a little bit further, I don't know that there's a ton of difference in perspective across the 7 members of council, or frankly the give or take 20 some people involved in structural management, so to speak, of the organization, or the 158 or so. I think there's a pretty shared perspective as to what can and should be, what makes us the best we can be. The challenge, I think, that is in front of us is that it's not necessarily codified from a council level and a council perspective, and it doesn't have that straight line, whether it's reporting back to council, the impacts or changes, or that straight line for our management teams and number of our staff. So, what I'm attempting to do or lay in front of council is an opportunity and a process that what I would say is a relatively short time, considering the scope of what we'd be looking to achieve, to bring that alignment right from again, mayor and council through senior leadership right to the all aspects of the organization. So.
Okay, thank you, and I look forward to that dialogue and conversation. However, on page 23 of 88 of the corporate plan, listed in the proposed 2023 corporate plan is 145.9 FTE.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I pulled it up here as well, and certainly those numbers I think are helpful. I think for me the question is coming from not just a conversation about recruiting, retaining staff, but there's been some dialogue over the last year about the service levels that we provide to the residents in our community on a number of different levels, whether it's lawn maintenance, snow clearing, or otherwise. And so if we're seeing that there's this, I would call drastic, if these are the numbers and that is what's on the books. Certainly I can appreciate why we're experiencing challenges providing service levels as our community grows and our staffing complement reduces. And so certainly as we go through this conversation, we'll be looking for some clarity around the numbers that we see here this evening.
Good, thanks for the comments, Councilor Anderson. Councilor Lowry?
Thank you, Your Worship. And just looking at that and looking at the engagement that's been recommended here, again, with that reduction as well, we do see some pretty large numbers in 2022. Again, 2019, 2021 showed a bit of a reprieve. But, when we're looking at numbers like 18.7% turnover in a calendar year, again, without a comparable number, it's hard to know what that is. But to me, turning over almost 20% of your workforce seems high. I've heard tonight about engagement with council. I've heard tonight about engagement with senior leadership. But what I haven't heard tonight is any potential engagement with our frontline employees. And I'm curious, so in my time on the Tri-Leisure Board representing council, we had a program that was called Great Places to Work. And it was an employee engagement tool that was used to help measure the employment satisfaction and to help measure the culture within that organization. And that was something that was brought through the governance board of the Tri-Leisure Centre. I'm curious, as a part of this process, is there going to be any direct frontline employee engagement through any type of employment surveys, through any type of programs that would help contribute employee satisfaction and employee culture and how the employees feel about the organization into this reporting and discussion?
Your Worship, appreciate that question. The short answer is yes. There's various forums that are essentially being proposed, and there's also various forums that are considered to be, again, I would say we're at a relative front end of a process with council. But there are ongoing ways where that takes place, and over the years there's been different ways and experiments taking place and so on and so forth. So short answer is yes. And there is already, I know, again, dealing with the consultant and working with the consultant, there are some opportunities for, what does that look like moving forward and moving along, so.
Okay. Good, I'm glad to hear that, the comment.
Can I follow up on that? Yep. Thank you, Your Worship. So following up on that, this will come at a cost. And in the lead sheet, we did have a mention, I believe it was, that the proposed costs will be carried in the existing budget. Expected costs for consultant support will be contained within the current operating budget. Now, if we are looking at some of those opportunities, obviously it would be pretty pertinent to start planning those now to be included in corporate plan coming up at the beginning of November. Our proposed corporate plan will come to us mid-October, which could potentially be even before the first engagement with council occurs. Should something not come forward to council for one of these type of programs or some of this engagement, that likely would be a one-of and could be supported by the tax levy stabilization reserve or any of those reserves, would it not be pertinent to have something like that planned now? Because if not, if it doesn't happen until after our first engagement, we're potentially looking at either an out-of-budget request or not until the 2025 corporate plan, which to me would be an excessive amount of time to wait for that.
Your Worship, certainly appreciate that question, comment. So a couple thoughts there I would put into the dialogue into the room. So, first and foremost, all of our operating budgets do include certain staff-related stuff, whether it's training and, appreciation lunches, and there already is existing amounts in there. So, and frankly, historically, they've been pretty good, I would say, training budgets and travel budgets and all that sort of stuff. So there is existing amounts there. I do have room in what would be considered a, CAO budget for what are either considered, substantial organizational needs or requirements and so on. And that's part of where the funding would come for this initial work. So I think that is relatively solid on that end. When you get into the, maybe call it what, the out months or the Q2, Q3 going into the next calendar year, yeah, you're right. There's potential that on some potential. I'm trying not to, assume the end of the process here a little bit, but there is some that would have higher, could have potential higher cost impacts. That is part of what would be, council's ultimately governance role as to what those amounts should or could be set at. If I could summarize that for what could potentially be some of the potential changes or whatnot, I think we're in reasonably good shape. Some of the big ones, they would have to be one-offs, or they'd have to be included in the next round of, we call it corporate planning, compensation review, structural designs, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. Any other more questions? See none, Councilor Pletchko for the motion, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council accept the organizational development strategy overview for information.
Thank you. And definitely looking forward to having those conversations with Council and SLT to figure out what our collective strategy would be moving forward. I think that will address a lot of the issues that maybe we have some questions about, or maybe there is no questions about. But that is looking forward to having those conversations with members of Council. So with that, the motion is on the floor to accept for information. Any debate about accepting it? Call the question. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, moving on to 9.3, which is the second quarter of 2023. Go ahead, administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll maybe just make a quick comment. The quarterly report is in front of you as per usual timing. We can certainly speak to any matter that's contained therein, and I will just double check if our General Manager of Strat Services has anything she wanted to point out specifically right off the bat.
Thank you, Town Manager. I'll just reference that the second quarterly report does summarize the operational services provided by the town from the months of April till June. That's the second quarter timing that we're presenting for Council's review this evening, and we will be sharing this publicly following Council's acceptance and include some of the summary in our communications campaign moving forward over the next couple of months to highlight some of the indications that are included within the report as well. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Members of Council, you had the opportunity to read the report. Any questions, comments, or like to speak to that? Councillor Hansard, go ahead.
Thank you, Councilor. Deputy Mayor Loynes will be glad I remembered to push the button by myself this time. Your Worship, I just want to say there's so many things I could say about this quarterly report, and I get excited about a lot of things in council package, believe it or not, after all these years. But I love it when we get the quarterly report in our package. I feel like everything's been put in a bundle and presented so beautifully for us to read, but not to bog us down in details, but more to give us an overview and a picture, a snapshot of where our community really is. I just want to point out a couple of things. Well, one thing is that our residents have access to this online, I hope, once if it's already been published or you're going to publish it, make it available. I hope they will all read it. And from this, take a great deal of pride in how the organization is thriving. The other thing I wanted to say, a few things that grabbed me, is there is no such thing as bad publicity. They tell us in my real estate world, and I'm thinking, yes, there is. You can have bad publicity in the real estate world, but I was shocked to see that our the reach on our Facebook page hit almost 1 million people on one of the worst things that we could report in a community, and that is the shutting down of our Midway because of the dangerous situation with that equipment. But 1 million people had the opportunity to be reached by that message, and almost 10,000 engaged, I mean like comments. And I thought, wow, Stony Plain made a mark there. And I think because we've taken the step to put a motion before Alberta municipalities and to have something done about the way amusement park equipment is inspected, that we have a chance here to do something really good. But 1 million people on one incident, wow. The other thing that impressed me was the tremendous jump in our transit service. And it goes from like 4,000 and something to 12,000 and something in the quarter. And I'm thinking, wow, if that is not a community validating that all the effort that was put in place by previous council and administration, particularly the council that I was not on, that moved forward with establishing the transit stations and moving in the direction, even though the Capital Region transit collapsed, it still bothers me. I still think that was a poor decision on the part of some, but our residents still want and need public transit. And I really am proud that we are part of offering a solution for public transit, and that those steps were taken and carried forward even by a council that I was not part of. Thank you very much to the previous council, to this term. Also, all through this report, I would encourage everybody to seek out these gems because they are through here in so many places. And I wanted to commend staff for a wonderful report. I know each department had to provide their information, and it's an opportunity for us to see the true picture of what's going on in our community and have it presented in a lovely way. So thank you very much for that, and I'm really proud to live in this community.
Thank you for your comments, Councilor Hansard. Any other comments? Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question to administration. On page 104, it says the Heritage Park Pavilion, and it's listed twice, but it doesn't say what the difference is for the hours, as one is 516 in 2022 and one was 333 in 2022. Can I just get some clarification as to what the difference is?
Okay.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Loynes, I will check into that and get back to you. It may simply be an error in reporting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just note that. Councillor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just going back to Councillor Hansard's comments there, referring to page 105 regarding the transit ridership. Yet I'm very encouraged to see these numbers. It's fantastic numbers to go from 570 riders in Q2 of 2022 to 4,800 essentially riders in Q2 of 2023. That's incredible. You know, Councillor Hansard did mention the unfortunate demise of the Transit Commission that we had in place that was supposed to take this service over. Since that is no longer in effect, we still do have a tri-municipal regional partnership with this service, with Spruce Grove, Stony Plain, and Parkland County all partnering. Where I'm challenged, and the question that I have coming from this report is the moving forward. We see a significant increase in demand, and I know I talk to residents on a regular basis already who are essentially asking for more already. I've had questions about the commuter service being extended to Stony Plain, which we know was supposed to happen at the beginning of September this year as a part of the commission. Since the demise of the commission, we haven't heard anything about that. That route was also supposed to be turned into a bus rapid transit route to help get people to downtown quicker, utilizing the on-demand system to feed into it, rather than having the commuter route rolling around to 18 to 20 different stops. I'm curious about how we have discussions on the expansion of the on-demand hours of operation. I'm hearing lots of people love it for the youth who would like to get to work after school, but unfortunately, many of them can't get home on the transit because their shifts run from 4 to 9, 4 to 10. And so I've had lots of people asking about when and how the discussion will happen in regards to that, as well as weekend service. I've had good conversations with fellow councillors from our partner municipalities about the potential of free ridership after 4 p.m. and on weekends and holidays for youth to help encourage youth to use the system and to get them familiar with the system. So with this fantastic reporting that we have showing that transit is desirable and is growing in the Tri-region, what is our plan and how are we going to carry forward having those conversations with our partners, given the fact that we can't just make a motion during our corporate planning process to increase the budget and to increase the service, because it is a tri-regional partnership and it is operated as a three-partner entity.
General Manager.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Laurie. I'll break this into a couple. So the regional aspect, EMTSC certainly has thrown a wrench into the works for us, but the regional work does continue. The transit specialists within the region are meeting frequently to talk about what a new regional system might look like and taking some of the learnings from the EMTSC models that were presented and potentially implementing those. So the regional CAOs do meet often. One of the mandates from the regional CAOs was for the transit specialists to get together and talk about what a potential move forward is for regional transit. So that work continues. There's some presentations happening in September, I believe, related to those move forwards in terms of short-term, long-term, or medium-term and long-term recommendations. And as that becomes more public or is adopted or across the region is accepted or alignment is achieved, I certainly believe that information will transact back into the council chambers. From a local, which is the on-demand, definitely we do have PWT, which is the contractor that's running that on-demand system for us. They're definitely looking at trends. They're definitely looking at ridership and are in frequent communication with ourselves and the city of Spruce Grove, being the contract holder, about where we can increase and flex some of our time. And they're offering suggestions and recommendations in terms of how we can enhance the service. That also does come with a cost implication, which we would then capture and include in our corporate plan related to increasing that service level. So we're certainly having those conversations. It's not lost on us. We're not saying, hey, we're having some great success here. That's good. Let's let it float for a couple of years and then get back at it again. We're certainly looking at and are receiving calls about the increased demand on weekends into the evening hours. And they're always looking to see how we can massage and work the schedule so that we can extend that service time within the budgetary parameters of which have already been captured. So there is some of that happening. However, in order for us to increase that service level into a Saturday, Sunday weekend, as an example, or extend the hours Monday to Friday, we're certainly looking at cost implications. So how that transacts, we still continue to talk with the city of Spruce Grove and understand that, and there will be some stuff that is included in our corporate plan moving forward related to service change cost allocations.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that there's still that conversation going on at the local level while we're waiting for the regional level to kind of figure out what they wanted to do. So you mentioned that there's some things coming forward after the conversations with City of Spruce Grove to the corporate plan. So will council have an opportunity to hear what those might be prior to that, or just during budget corporate planning?
Your Worship, I would have to look into where that's sitting right now. I've assumed that portfolio as of 2 o'clock this afternoon, so definitely we'll get up to speed on that and the implications related to it, and likely there would have been a session prior to corporate plan, so you have a keen understanding versus debating a 3-figure increase to a service level on a night where you're talking about a million, multi-million-dollar budget. So definitely would be something that we would bring forward prior to.
Yeah, 100%. And any service changes will definitely be a corporate planning conversation amongst members of council. Councilor Lori?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm actually very challenged by that viewpoint, because until the regional councils that are involved in the operating of that transit system have an opportunity to sit down and discuss with one another what the potential priorities may be, I feel that might be a little bit of cart before the horse, because if we're not going to hear anything about it, we're not going to have that discussion with our regional councils until such a time as it's in our corporate plan in front of us. Well, what happens if one approves it and the other doesn't? Then it goes nowhere. And so while I appreciate the work that's gone on, I'm concerned that the work that's going on is going on without any governance oversight whatsoever. That includes the regional transit that's being talked about, which is, again, a meeting of the Edmonton region CAOs with no governance component after the municipal councils, the governance component, voted down that transit commission. So I'm very concerned about the direction this is going and how it is morphing out of the governance decisions that have been made. And I'm concerned that the direction it continues to go will result in a lack of governance engagement, which then when it comes forward will create a challenge to actually have it approved. Because if there has been no governance engagement, how can those in the position to make that approval support it? So I'm not going to ask any more questions on it tonight. I'm going to leave it as just a little bit of my insight that I'd like to see a serious conversation between the administration and the elected officials of the Tri-Region in regards to transit. I believe we need to sit down with our partner municipalities from an administrative and governance perspective and talk about transit, talk about the ideas. understand where our partners are and how they feel about it before we just see something show up in the corporate plan. And then I would like to see some more updates coming into council chambers about the Edmonton regional portion that we have engagement and involvement on.
Okay. Further good comments, Councillor Laurie, and I would just say that definitely the Edmonton Metro Regional Transit System had a lot of governance from the elected officials and administration, and that also failed. So let's work one at a time. That failed, so let's look at the next step going forward. I do appreciate the fact that we do need to have that conversation in terms of what we see for the region, as mentioned by Councillor Laurie. And that's why I asked the question, do we see that before corporate planning or not? But I also, just to echo that to members of council, that's the system that we're in. Think of the TLC, the Tri-Regional Partnership. That board approves that budget, and then it comes to our 3 municipalities without prior conversation with our 3 municipalities. And we vote for it or we don't, and then they have to deal with the fallout. Same with the Meridian Housing Foundation. When it comes, that foundation, that governance structure, approves a budget, then comes forward for council to ratify or not. So I think I like that fact that there is things coming down. I'd be very disappointed if our general manager said, well, we're not doing nothing. It's defeated, so we're just going to wait here until the next iteration. I'm glad that I hear that there is still conversation on the Edmonton Metro region and also the regional level. So as mentioned by Councillor Laurie, some of the comments were extending hours of service and weekends and evenings, so let's work. I believe that's the first step before we look at the next ones.
Point of clarity, Your Worship.
Go ahead.
Just for clarity, both the TLC and the Meridian Housing Foundation that you referenced, in which create their budgets and then those are sent forward to councils, have elected official representation on their board of directors, which then communicates that information back to council, whereas currently in transit, we do not.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, on this, definitely this is the third quarter report. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. Look, now I have my paper over here and I'm trying to do. So I would just like to put a kudos out to the communications department. I think the last quarterly report I mentioned or asked questions regarding what were some of the definitions of the words that were used in the communications section, impressions, clicks, reach, all of these things, and so here they are. So you guys do listen, and I appreciate that. But along that vein, I'm just, now that I know what some of these things mean, being not exactly social media savvy or the like, I'm next, oh look, now it disappeared. I'd next be kind of asking maybe if administration could give some type of assessment. So I see in the business economic development section, there's a number of e-newsletters, and we see open sends and their open rate, and so that looks good. It looks like we get some over 50% people open that e-newsletter, and that makes me happy. Then I look down at the Reimagining Stony Plain Digital Campaign Analytics, and I see a lot of eyeballs see these, a lot of impressions are made, but we're not converting a whole bunch. So but I wouldn't know if that's a good conversion rate or a bad conversion rate for this type of campaign. And so maybe I'd be looking for administration to, like I say, give some type of assessment and qualification. Is that good, bad, more than we expected, worse than we expected? I would be happy with something fairly broad.
Okay, that's a good comment. Administration, anything about the open rates? That's page 93.
Thank you, Your Worship, and to Councillor Meyer and all of council. So the campaign that you're referencing on page 93 in particular, so that campaign was first launched in Q1. So we don't have necessarily a depth of time that we're tracking that. So just as it began early this year, we are going to continue to monitor it and have a better understanding of assessing the value and benefit of that campaign. The work that we are doing on that we are monitoring and providing analytics in the background of that. And so we are looking at how we can adjust and make changes to some of the areas that we're targeting and how we're utilizing some of our online campaign resources in order to get better conversion rates that you see the number on the bottom of that graph. So some of the work that our administration does is looking at how we can continue to analyze that information, continue to use support and tools that can help us to refine the campaign as we go forward. So that is happening at the administrative level. This is certainly a snapshot of an overview of that, and we'll continue to present a summary of that and some of the impacts as the campaign unfolds. This is basically the 6th month of the online campaign, and it can be a period of time before we can kind of really track kind of results and impacts, but we want to be transparent about that as we're sharing that going forward. So certainly some of the nuanced details and background information of this does get shared with our Growth and Commerce Committee, and our administrative team does kind of try to provide a bit more of an overview at that level. But going forward, we'll continue to present this in the quarterly report and share kind of analysis results as well. So this hopefully will refine and get more informative as we go forward over the course of the campaign and over the course of time as we utilize it. I hope that helps to answer some of what you were looking for, but certainly can look to refining that as we go forward in the future.
So if I can respond. Yes, no, I appreciate that, answered a lot of my questions. And like I say, I'm not very savvy on this, so I would be looking for, I mean, you could give it a letter grade, A, B, C, it's doing good, it's doing bad, this is what we expected, or something like that. That would help me. I'm not looking to, I don't have the knowledge, obviously, to help you on this, and nor would I want to, but I would like to know if you guys are getting what you think you're getting out of it.
Thank you. Definitely with the economic development, does any members of the GCC would like to make a comment? Councilor Lurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and yeah, thank you, Councillor Meyer, for bringing that forward. This was a campaign that was heavily discussed at GCC, and the Economic Development Department is very encouraged by the results. They do feel that the success that they have seen has been good. The contractor that they were working with did make some amendments based on some of the results that they were seeing and some of the patterns they were seeing, and that actually created a pretty good increase as well. So if you're looking for a letter grade, I think the ECDev department would definitely give it an A.
Thank you, Councilor, and thank you, Councilor Meyer. Okay, any more questions, comments regarding the Q3? Q2. Councilor Anderson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to start with an apology because I feel like I say when it comes to our quarterly reports the same thing every time. So I'll try to come up with something different for next time. But, you know, when we sit down for strategic planning and we're trying to set a vision and a hope for our community, I always love when these quarterly reports come in because it's that vision actioned. And, you know, going through each page of the report, you can see how each department within our municipality has their hands in here. You know, some of them stand out. You know, we have Community Protective Services. We can see the statistics for our peace officers and our fire department and those sorts of things. But, you know, our Public Works team captured in the number of hours that our facilities are used, the field space, Heritage Park, those sorts of things. You know, Planning and Infrastructure team getting the roads done so that we can, you know, have these amenities that are easily accessible within our community. And so, you know, I think, you know, nothing makes me more proud as a resident of Stony Plain when this comes through. You know, we're looking at a highlight of 3 months, and I think I count more than 24 like specific initiatives that were undertaken to provide services for the people who live in our municipality and the guests that visit here. And so, you know, all that to say, you know, kudos to our leadership team for the direction and support you provide our staff in providing a community that we're proud to live, work, and play in. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? See none, yes. Just have to echo some of the comments that the report is well done. And I love what Councillor Hansford has said earlier. It's just a huge nugget of information that we need to share with our residents. Because there's so much that happens, even sitting on this side of the table, that you kind of forget of everything that we've approved and initiated. And then just to see some of the numbers and the engagement and the reach of the people that we're helping out. And I think many of the things that we've talked about was making events accessible and free to many people. And I think a lot of the events that we're doing in the town of Swimming Plain is reaching to that point. And I'm very happy to be in this seat to help make sure that those continue to happen in the community. Okay. And I think that's all the questions, so we'll go to Deputy Mayor for the motion, please.
The Town Council accept the 2023 second quarterly report for information.
Any debate on the motion to accept? Call the question, all in favor? That is carried. Okay, move on to council discussion. So this is the time that we allow members of council to provide any updates or questions to staff about issues that are brought forward to them by residents. We'll start over with Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Seems like there's not a meeting that doesn't go by where I announce that the library is once again searching for a library director. It's quite fitting that we spoke about an organizational development strategy today for the town, because it's quite fitting that the town is looking at a organizational development strategy, because it's a thing that the library is going to be tackling, maybe to get to the sort of the bottom of why we keep going through library directors. So just an update to the town and to the rest of council. We're on the search for a director again. So there's that. And then on a separate note, I would just like to ask through you to administration, the running track over by the new Westview school, it's the old football track. In the one corner is a depression. It pools water. The trees are growing ever closer and closer to that track. I'm curious if maybe administration can look into maybe some minor maintenance there to stop the decay of it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And I know not running track. I think we own half of it, and the school owns half of it on the division of property lines. So I'm not too sure if that's ours to take care of, or we work in joint partnership with the school division.
Your worship, to the Councillor Meyer, I'll take that back and discuss with staff. I'll ask that they go do an inspection and see what possible remedies we could do with the track.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted to, I do have one question for administration, actually, that we'll start with. The Spruce Grove Stony Plain Trail, I'm looking for an update on the two different trails. First and foremost, the first trail that was installed going north down Boundary Road that was to be connected. We experienced some interruption due to the pipeline construction. So just wondering if we have an update on that and if we will be doing a formal grand opening of that trail or not. And then also wondering if we can get a status update on the trail that was to run adjacent to Highway 16A, as I believe that one was supposed to be completed this year as well.
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie. For the first part of the question, I haven't heard back from Spruce Grove, who were the ones that were managing that construction, as the status of that. I'll be reaching out to them this week. We've been having a number of touch points on their second question, actually. So I can report to council that the tender for the project did close in August. We are in the final steps of procuring a contractor within budget. We had hoped to have tendered this sooner. There were requirements within the Water Act and Alberta Environment that the town had to complete, as well as some approvals through Alberta Transportation that regrettably took a little longer than we would have liked. With respect to the Water Act approval, there is requirement for any capital projects of this nature to get some sign-off from local landowners. There has been one holdup with one particular landowner that we are actively working to resolve as efficiently as we can. We've engaged with Spruce Grove for assistance in addressing this. I can't really go into total details with this at this time. It is something we are working with it. That said, the contractor has provided a schedule to get going in hopes that we can start the project in the coming next week or two, and in hopes that we can resolve this land matter soon. However, if we cannot before the end of construction season, that section may have to be deferred to next year.
Excellent, thank you for that. And I certainly hope that whatever needs to happen with that landowner can be done in due time for the benefit of the residents of both municipalities. Other than that, Your Worship, I just want to say, what a great summer it was with events here in the town, all the way from being able to host Sheriff Umbach's family and some descendants from his family in Blue and Line, and be able to show them around town and visit some of the sites. The Blueberry Bluegrass Festival, our Downtown Thursdays, the outdoor movie, unfortunately, not going ahead due to the crazy rain and hail and wind that blew through. That was probably the only disappointment, I think. And then capped off with one event that, well, I don't think it was widely promoted. It was very widely attended, being the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra being at Heritage Pavilion this past weekend for a fantastic event. So, just another great summer in Stony Plain, and looking forward to what the fall and winter have in store for us.
Thank you, Councilor Lowry. Councilor Hansard.
Sorry, I have little to say. Mr. Mayor, I was privileged to go to the Paul First Nations grand entry for their powwow with a number of the members of council participate in that. It was hot that day, but it was wonderful. And particularly I was impressed by, the grandeur of all of it. I mean, we were in a simple place, but this is no small deal to them, and it was great that so many of our council was able to be there. The other thing was, have we had a council meeting since former Mayor Ken Lemke was at his funeral? I just wanted to mention that a number of us attended that funeral service for Ken Lemke at the Alliance Church here in Stony Plain, and we remember our own and thank him for his years of service, and thank his family for allowing his years of service to the people of Stony Plain. Other than that, I enjoyed my summer off. It would be lovely if we could have 6-week breaks every now and then, not just once a year, because this was the best summer I've ever experienced on council. So whoever thought up doing away with these meetings and pushing them to the far ends of July and August, thank you for that. It meant a lot to my family.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Hansard. Councilor Pletchko.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. To administration, a couple of questions regarding Range Road 12. We've got some dust control on it. However, once we put dust control on it, we tend to forget that that road still needs a grader on it. Coming down the hills, if you're not stopped at the top, you're probably going to go across the tracks right at this point in time. So I'm wondering if we can get back to a regular road maintenance schedule on Range Road 12, not only with the dust control, but with graders as well.
Your Worship, to the Councillor Pletchko, I'll inquire your comment on to our roads crews. I know that they are actively working on our roads right now. I'll get to some specifics about what's been going on Range Road 12 and communicate them back to you.
Appreciate that. Next question is, I've been asked a number of times within our community, apparently speeding has become a problem within our community. And I know we do a great job, Carl, as CPOs, but what I'm hearing is as soon as the CPO shows up, it gets under control for a short period of time. And I'm wondering if maybe a practice could be for us to have some unmarked vehicles that we're able to do, and I don't know if that is allowed within our municipality, but it's been highly recommended by a few people in the community that we possibly use unmarked vehicles on different occasions. Maybe not to respond to residents, but if we're setting up a speed trap or if we're watching downtown for youth and the problems that were noted earlier this year, maybe that might be a way to see what is actually happening, and that would continue, so we were able to curb that a little bit. However, I will give you kudos. I've been told by many of the residents downtown that the CPOs have done a phenomenal job at controlling what has been going on downtown. So it's getting much better. They're feeling much safer when they go out on the street, which is a positive thing for us and the people that live downtown, because we want them to be able to move within our community as well as everybody move within our community.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Pletchko, unmarked vehicles for CPOs are not permitted. We're very regulated with all the way down to the stripe on our pants and the uniform that we wear and the equipment that we can carry. So the decals on the door are very regulated also in terms of size and font and the whole 9 yards. So I can reach out to the RCMP. We do have a traffic division within our detachment. They certainly do have unmarked vehicles that likely could provide us some assistance. If you would like to just send me the location or the locations that are more prevalent, we can certainly talk with the RCMP because they do have unmarked traffic vehicles.
Okay, I will send them to you in an email. Thank you for that. And then I just wanted to give kudos to administration for this summer events within our community. I think each one of us has had a chance throughout the summer to attend several of them or a few of them. But if you have, the amount of people that come downtown is phenomenal. Councillor Anderson and myself had a chance to do Midsummer Thursdays and talk to local residents. And the funny thing about it is, it's not just our local residents that we're attracting to our community. Multitude of people from St. Albert, some Edmonton, some all over the province. St. Albert was a big one. I talked to I don't know how many people from St. Albert, and they all made the same comment about it. It's a fun-filled event. And then I went for a little walk and left Councillor Anderson by himself, and I went and talked to some of the businesses to see what they thought of it. And I will tell you, out of 8 or 10 that I talked to, all but one said they wished that we would do more to bring business downtown. So kudos to everybody that does what they do in the community here from our administration level, because it's paying off. People are noticing it. Kudos to Jazz Matthews for doing Wednesday summer sessions. They are bringing people out in droves. Other than a rainy weekend, I think most of our weekends were pretty good this summer, and that goes for all of our weekends. I think we were very lucky every evening we had. It was pretty good to be able to draw people, but we drew a lot of people to our community, so that was a very exciting evening that Thursday, talking to that many people. And I don't know how many balloons we blew up, but we blew a lot of them, so got rid of all the helium. So going forward next summer, I think a big bottle of helium is something that you need, because it drew a ton of people to the booth. It drew the kids, and then it gave us a chance to talk to the adults, which was also very rewarding for everybody there. And I think that's it. The summer was fun-filled. The last thing I'd like to really talk about is, I think we had the opportunity this summer, all of us, to attend something with our Indigenous relations that we have within our communities. And I think that was phenomenal that they extended to us invites to participate and partake in all of their events that they had. And I know we invite them on a regular basis, and I think we continue to reach out and touch that group and continue to collaborate and build relations, because I think it's starting to show that we as communities can work together in all aspects.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Pletchko. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to echo Councillor Pletchko's statements in regards to our Indigenous neighbours. I had the opportunity to attend several different events with them, and it was a true honor to see all the details that go into what they do and all the ceremonies and what it means. So I appreciated that. I wanted to also remind everybody that school is starting, except for those teachers that started today. next week, and just to watch the crosswalks. They're going to get very busy very quickly. And thirdly, through you, Your Worship, to admin, I was just curious, the bollards or the pond people that you call on Main Street, I've noticed several of them have been burnt out lately, and I just wanted to bring that to attention.
Thank you. Your Worship, Your Worship, through the Councillor Loyens, thank you for the report. I'll send that right over to our Public Works Department. The bollards, if just for general knowledge, they're hooked up in a series, so if one does get hit, the others can be affected. So I'll ask that our Public Works teams take a look at it and see if that is the culprit, if there's something else going on, and we'll try and address it promptly.
Great, thank you. And then, sorry, just one more thing to the General Manager. I know I sent you an email earlier, but it was brought to my attention that the catch basin cover was missing in front of
The post office.
the post office. Thank you. And just to let everyone know that is being taken care of.
Councillor Anderson?
Thanks. Just a couple of quick questions to close the loop on some business from last year. So just looking for an update on the water testing in regards to the asbestos concrete pipe. I know staff have worked hard to send some water off, have it tested. Just looking for the results of that testing, please.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Anderson. So we did complete we did send some samples down to a lab. This is an additional test to the regular testing that we do in our reservoirs in our system. The test that had to be to test for asbestos is done out of country. So it is. I just want to emphasize that it's not something done locally. That said, the results did come back. There were no measurable asbestos readings within the system. So at this time, administration doesn't have any concerns with that for the purposes of the question.
And thank you for that report. I appreciate the due diligence and following up, and I think we've got the best news that we could have hoped for, and that's that those levels were not meaningful in any way, which is great. And I think until that AC pipe is replaced and its life runs out, hope that we'll continue some ongoing testing on biennial or whatever that looks like basis, just to ensure the safety of our residents. Second question relates to some barrier-free parking at the splash pad and the outdoor park. Was something that had been brought forward by some community members. I think we had a single stall, just looking for an update there in terms of what we've been able to do with adding a second barrier-free parking spot.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Anderson, so we received that question from Council earlier, I think right before the break. And since that question was sent, staff have been talking internally about how and where we could do that from. The short answer is yes, it's something we're looking to add, another barrier-free parking stall at the pool. It's taken this time because we have to talk with a number of different services within the town to make sure that everyone's in line with the implications of this. And so it's in the queue, so to speak. We are trying to tie it up with some additional work that we'll be doing with the pool towards the end of this season. So it'll be done in the next month or so, and once it gets scheduled, and we'll be having that for operation at the start of next year.
Perfect. That's great to hear. I know that will be a well-used parking stall by a number of people in our community, so thank you for that. Had a couple questions on the disc golf course. I know there was some excitement around the opening, but I also understand there's been a little speed bump, I guess, along the way, and so just maybe a quick update on where the disc golf course is at.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Anderson. Just wanted to make sure you're on Deputy Mayor. Certainly, yeah, we did have a bit of a speed bump. we're getting back on track again. We've applied for some additional funding, and there's been a local service club has expressed some interest also. So definitely getting back on track with that. The bulk of the work was done in the spring, and won't take very long for us to get it to a point. And there's actually been some revelations in terms of whether or not concrete pads are the best thing to put in for T-pads and those types of things. So there's certainly been some ability for us to trial and error a couple things, and understand that hand bombing, I don't even know how many cubic meters of concrete into that location would not go really well, and there'd probably be more spillage than there would be pouring concrete for pads. So certainly we'll do something that will satisfy and is very consistent with other locations. Devon just recently put in some that are working quite well. So there's been some learning and some alterations to the plan, and certainly we still believe we can get the bulk of it or have it actionable before the snow comes.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I know there's a number of people within our community that love the winter disc golf as well, and so I'm sure they'll be out there once the snow flies as well. And then finally, just to echo Councillor Palechko, but through the strategic planning process, I know council had raised a desire to be more visible within the community, and our Midsummer Thursdays this year were a part of that. The privilege of being out there a couple of times, and the work that the economic development team and our leadership team did to pull that off to allow us to engage with residents was phenomenal. I think we went through 3 things of helium, and we ran out of balloons. People were taking town of Stony Plain balloons even without helium, because balloons are just super exciting. But as Councillor Palechko said, it allowed us a great opportunity to engage with the adults and the kids, and hearing from the kids what they love about Stony Plain. And if they're not from Stony Plain, they told us what they loved about their own community, which was great for us to hear as well. And just as we move forward into the future. So huge kudos to all of our staff has been shared this evening. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you members of council for sharing and asking those questions and bringing those up. That's good to hear, to see what's happening in our community, and definitely it has been a good 6 weeks since we last updated each other, so it's good to have that refresher. So in terms of just a couple comments for myself, is I have to echo the fact that our staff did an excellent job in terms of the summer events that are planned this year. I think the turnout has been phenomenal, and the weather cooperated with us. And definitely, anything I can say is that I heard so many people that come into the community that they come to Stony Plain because of the events that we have. They don't live here, but they come here for the events. So again, I think we're doing the proper things to get Stony Plain noticed, and then it is a community of choice for people. Another thing is, just drove by Rotary Park, and if council is aware, last year we tried a temporary fire pit there to see how that worked. It worked extremely well, especially during the skating season. If you've not yet driven by there right now, administrator, our staff has done an excellent job in creating some seating and a fixed fire pit there. So hopefully that the rotation still remains the same, where administration drops off a bundle of wood every Friday, and then if it's used, it's used. If it's not, we just still drop another one off, and then really allows the residents to be able to use that while they're skating over this winter. Okay. Another thing, again, I'd just like to mention that Councillor Loynes, the Deputy Mayor, mentioned that school starts September 5th. And for the last few weeks, we've been a little heavy-footed through those school zones because they're not active. But as of September 5th, they are active, so please slow down because you will get a ticket. That is one of the things that we do in our community, is that we enforce school zones, playground zones, and construction zones, mainly because that's where we see the biggest need is, and make sure the safety of our residents, pedestrians, and vehicle traffic. Okay. With that, that ends our council discussion, so we'll move into a closed session at this point in time. So as everyone's aware, closed session is the ability for council to come in, and it's not live streamed, so the public will not be allowed to be part of the closed session. If any member of the public wants to be notified when council comes out of live closed session, they can definitely send an email to legislative@stonyplain.com, or they can leave their name with our recording secretary, and they'll be called back in when that happens. The only motion that's made in closed session is the motion to come out of closed session. And if anything that needs to be directed to administration, a motion will be made after we come out of closed session. Okay. With that, I need a motion to go in the closed session. Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I make a motion that Town Council move into closed session per FOIP Section 24 to discuss personal matter.
Okay, and just before I call the question, members of council, once that question is called, we're going to take a 5-minute recess so we can have the chambers cleared out. So only the personnel and council members that need to be in here will be in here. I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. That's carried. And we'll take a 5-minute recess to clear up the room, please. Okay. Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So the council has finished their closed session. The motion that was made in camera was made by Councillor Anderson to come out of closed session, and that was carried 7-0. Administration, has anybody emailed or written down that they want to be notified that council has come out of closed session?
Through the mayor, no, there has not been.
Okay, so with that, then we move on to the agenda, which is number 12, which is adjournment. So we will adjourn. So thank you very much, administration. Done.